windows were closed, so it couldn't have been a wild animal or anything. The second cat seemed relaxed, while the other one was definitely tensed up. It couldn't have been another cat or anything. Note too that this is the same room that I heard the clicking noises the night prior. Needless to say, though, I was very happy that that was our last night in there. My dad's job requires him to go inside people's houses. He's been in thousands of apartments and houses, so I asked him what was the creepiest or weirdest thing that he ever saw or experienced. And this is what he told me. So my dad arrived early at this apartment complex around 7 AM because he had to go through every apartment, doing some maintenance starting from the basement. He entered a laundry room located in the basement where there was a man, around 50-ish, wearing a nice white t-shirt with a tie, suits and pants, but had no shoes, and he had a green tarp in his hands. He thought it was kind of weird, but just ignored it since it was not his business. Later that day, he left to go to a local coffee shop to spend his break, and when he came back to work, there were police cars surrounding the area just everywhere. Out of curiosity, he asked one of the police officers what was going on, and it turns out that a homicide was committed. Dad then asked if what he saw was related to this crime, and boy, was it ever. So after the police interrogation, they told him that the man without shoes stabbed his mother to death in his bathtub, wrapped her in a tarp and dragged her outside. The police allegedly caught this guy dragging his dead mother in the backyard. Of course, they didn't let my dad do his job in the murderer's apartment until after a proper investigation. A while goes by though, and my dad gets to go back in there to finish whatever he was doing, and he said that he just felt really uncomfortable doing plumbing and other maintenance in a house where someone got brutally murdered, especially in a bathroom where the bathtub was still full of dried up blood. So I've lived in my townhouse now for over 2 years, and I could tell right away that the vibe was off when I first moved in. And things were really bad for a while, but now they've just gotten so much worse. So I have a stair that I call the murder stair because I constantly trip or get hurt on this one stair. This is the same stair that I'll see a face watching me from while I'm in the living room. I constantly see someone on the stairs from the corner of my eye while I'm in my living room too. The main thing on the stairs is a face. It looks like a young boy watching me quite often. It looks like it's just peering around the corner and watches me when I'm alone. I'm not sure how to describe the face, but it's really grey with black tones, black eyes, and really funky teeth. I don't feel threatened when it's watching, but more like it's just keeping an eye on me, if that makes sense. So my son has come to me and asked me if I was watching him brush his teeth because he saw someone behind him when he was brushing. Or he's told me about the scary person that he sees in his room sometimes. Now, I haven't talked to him about what I've seen at all, so I know that he's not lying to me either. I've also had maintenance men freak out while doing work in my place, but there was an older guy doing work in my kitchen while I was there talking with him, and he whipped around behind me and asked if somebody else was here because he saw someone walk up next to him. I can usually tell if it's in my living room too because it will mess with the blinds on my curtains. It also will sometimes throw water bottles or Febreze bottles off of the countertops or dressers. It calmed down a bit when I got my therapy dog, but now she'll just randomly stop and watch the stairs, especially at night. And she won't step on the stairs if it's dark or if I'm not with her. She watches certain areas too that I usually see the face, and she does not like being left on the stairs alone. But she also will randomly start and then run upstairs like she's just running from something. Anyway, today I'm going to try my rosary beads to hang on the stairs where the spot that I see the face most is, and I'm going to try again today to take my phone and set it up to record it just to see if anything happens. Mainly because it's actually not limited to nighttime, but it also occurs in the day. I haven't spoken to my son about anything yet. He's on a road trip with my parents and won't be back until Saturday, but wish me luck, guys, and if I see anything or find anything on my phone, I'll be sure to show you guys. I live in Adelaide in South Australia. I moved to the city from a small country town with my partner, Mrs. Bradjikarp, roughly 10 years ago now. We moved into a small, two-storey townhouse with another friend. It was a really nice place too, clearly an older building, but the interior had been modernised. So everything started off okay. Our friends took the master bedroom, which came with a walk-in robe, while we took the room next door. Both bedrooms and bathroom were on the second floor. Under the stairs was a small broom cupboard. We didn't use it much at first because, for some reason, it was extremely cold in there. But nothing could heat it up either, not even a heater, which was weird. We assumed that there was a hole leading to the outside somewhere or something, and we just left it at that. It was about a month into living there, though, that the first weird thing occurred. So I was home alone, sitting downstairs with the TV on quietly while I read a book, and I heard my name. I looked at the TV, thinking that someone on there must have also been named Bradjikarp. But no, nobody on the episode of Scrubs was named that. Out of sheer curiosity, though, I turned the TV off and listened intently. And there was nothing. So I figured it must have been my imagination and went to turn the TV back on. As I pressed the power button, I heard my name again, though, and the voice was definitely coming from upstairs. I've believed in the paranormal since I was a kid, due to other experiences, but this, for some reason, just really got my hairs on end. I called Mrs. B and asked when she would come home. Not until tomorrow, I'm staying at my mum's overnight, she said. Our other housemate was also away. Great, so I just turned the TV back on and raised the volume, found some blankets in the cold cupboard, and slept downstairs that night. The name calling continued on and off for a few months, but our other housemates never heard it. In fact, she didn't believe in any paranormal things and thought I was just making it up. Mrs. B did, though, and agreed that there was something else in the house, because not long after, our housemate moved out and we took over the master bedroom. A few days later, a handyman came to install a TV antenna plugged on the wall downstairs. To get wires through the walls, we had to get into the crawl space upstairs. It was around lunchtime, and we had an awesome takeaway place around the corner. I let the guy know that I was ducking out for 10 minutes or so to grab some food, and left him in the crawl space. And when I got back, I found him downstairs looking really confused. "Hey, did you come back about 5 minutes ago and call my name?" he asked. I said no, and he explained that he heard the door open and close, and that his name was called. He chalked it up to the next door neighbour, but I knew that it wasn't. The real terror, though, began about a week after that. So I came home from work at around 8 p.m. Mrs. B was working late and wouldn't be home until midnight. But when I walked into the back door, I directly heard her call my name from upstairs. I called back that I didn't think she'd be home yet, and made my way upstairs. Opening the bedroom door, I instantly realised that it was not Mrs. B who called me. A wave of hate just burst from that door and hit me like a ton of bricks, and never before and never again have I ever felt a presence like that. Whatever the hell it was, did not like me at all. I quickly got changed and I took a look around the room. The walk-in robe had a white curtain for a door, and I closed it every morning when we left the house, and it was wide open. I raced downstairs and left the house, and I just went to the pub that day. I met Mrs. B at home when she finished and told her what happened. She didn't believe me at first, but when she saw how terrified I was of our room, she realised then that I wasn't lying or trying to pull the wool over her eyes. The hate in the room was gone at this point, but I could still feel something. We went to bed though, and I closed the robe curtain again. I swear that I could feel eyes on me as I did so though, and I slept on the side of the bed furthest away from it. And in the morning, you probably guessed it, but that curtain was wide open again. We lived in that house for a couple of months after that, and I never experienced the hate as intense as that again until our final day in the house, but there was definitely still something there, something that didn't want me there too. I put all my clothes in the spare room so I didn't have to go in the walk-in ever again, because that's where whatever it was felt strongest to me. It was also the location of the crawl space hatch. Friends heard the voices call out sometimes, but nobody else felt the presence like I did. And the day we moved out, I was the last one there, and as I was checking over all the rooms and locks for the last time, I heard my name again. I shivered, but this time I ignored it and kept doing what I was doing. I checked the last lock and walked out of the house for the last time. I got in my car and looked up at the master bedroom window, and I swear to you that, without a doubt, there was a woman up there, glaring at me. That feeling of just pure hatred hit me for the last time, and I floored it out of that street and never looked back. Mrs. B to this day doesn't believe me about that because she didn't see it with her own eyes. I can appreciate the need to see to believe, but I know what I saw, and I really hope that I never see it again. From what I've heard, the tenants after us didn't stay long either. I did some research, but couldn't find any deaths in that home, so I'm not too sure where whatever it is came from. All I know is that it was absolutely real and, quite honestly, scared the hell out of me. A few years ago, my boyfriend and best friend of 4 years had just dumped me. I was using this website, Meet Me, to meet people in my area while I was in college. My profile clearly stated that I was not explicitly looking for anyone to date, just wanted to meet new people. I had just been dumped, so I was really just trying to put myself out there, and I'm not really the type to go out. In my area, there's a giant dance-a-thon that my university did every year to raise money for a children's hospital. I had someone message me and ask if I had heard of it. I told him that my dance team usually performed at it every year. He told me that he was actually one of the children that was supported by the event when he was younger. I thought that was really cool, so I asked him a little bit about his experience with that and genuinely thought it was interesting. After a while, that conversation was kind of dead and I didn't really have much else to say. Plus it was getting late and I kind of wanted to go to bed. So I told him, and after about 10 minutes of laying in my bed trying to sleep, I got another notification. I glanced at it real fast and this dude had honestly sent me a novel. After this event, I swiftly deleted the account, so unfortunately I don't have access to the exact messages, so I'm going to do my best to remember it. But the first one went a little something like, "Look, I'll be honest, I really want to keep talking to you. In fact, I'd actually really like to take you on a date sometime. You seem like a really nice girl and really sweet and interesting. I think we would get along extremely well. I'm kind of alone in this world." Insert long-winded commentary about his loneliness here, and he also did not use any punctuation, so it took me a while to actually dissect all of the message. I responded and told him that I wasn't interested. He was about 7 years older than me too. I was 20 at the time though, and tried to just say goodnight again. Then he responded with another novel along the lines of, "I don't think you understand. You are perfect for me. You were made for me. I'm sure of it. God speaks to me, you know. God wants us to be together, and we will be. One day, you will be mine." I'm trying to be polite because he was so nice earlier, and I guess I'm naive or something. I don't totally know, but I kept responding, trying to let him down easy. And here are some more of the highlights. He says, "Maybe not today and maybe not tomorrow, but God has decided this. Who are we to deny him of his plan? Someday in the future, we will end up together. You will realize it soon. We're going to have 3 children. I know their names, 2 boys, 1 girl. God spoke their names to me. I wrote them down when I was 7 years old, and I still have the paper. Do you know how I know you're going to be my wife? Because I wrote your name down with it. You will be my wife. Don't make a mistake. God is talking to me now. He's saying your name to me, and I can't let you leave." And at that point, I blocked and reported him, noped the hell off the site, and went to bed, all creeped out. Morning came though, and he had found me on Facebook, and he was going on and on and on, starting with comments along the lines of, "Where did you go? How could you do this to me? You're denying your fate." And he did it all night long, literally all night. I freaked out, told him to leave me alone pretty aggressively, and blocked him. I deleted all of the social media apps off of my phone for the next few days. I asked my roommates to stay at home with me. They agreed after I told them what had happened. And I was actually genuinely afraid that this dude was going to come and find me. I mean, he was local, and I had made nice conversation by telling him my major and some clubs I was in. He could have showed up anywhere, but thankfully, he didn't, and that was the end of that. For now, at least. couple of weeks ago, I was sitting in my car in a parking lot on the lake, waiting on a friend. The lot had a few cars in it, and it was only about 5 PM, so it was in no way dark or empty, and I felt completely safe. I was just mindlessly scrolling through Reddit when I saw a truck pull up on my passenger side. I looked up for a second, but didn't think much of it. I mean, it wasn't super close to me, but maybe a parking spot or two between us. Pretty much as soon as I looked back down to my phone, the truck peeled off so quickly it startled me, and I looked back up. It quickly did a U-turn in front of my car and sped up next to my drive side, barely missing hitting me and stopping so close to me that he was blocking my door and part of the front of my car with his truck, making it impossible for me to get out or drive away. There were 3 men in the car, all smiling at me so big and creepily that the whole thing just sent shivers down my spine. "What you doing, hun?" the driver asked in a flirty tone. I tried to hide how startled I was and responded as nonchalantly as I could muster. "Just waiting on my boyfriend. He'll be here any minute." His smile instantly dropped into a scowl and never returned. "Is he big?" His expression in combination with his words made it feel like a threat. I'm a petite young girl that waits tables and bartends. I've been in similar situations many times before. I know from experience the only way to handle these guys is confidently. They come on stronger when they can sense you're nervous. I laughed loudly and answered, "Judging by your truck, yeah, he's bigger than you where it matters. Do yourself a favor and leave before he gets here, alright?" I thought that I had them. I mean, why would they be interested in a girl that mocks your truck and your dick, right? But boy, I was wrong. "Well, how about you just get out of here before he shows up, and I can show you I ain't compensating for nothing." He didn't say it flirtatiously. He was pissed when he said it, I could tell. These guys were already creeping me out, but now I was terrified I was going to be kidnapped. The parking lot wasn't empty, but as I was waiting on someone to meet me, I parked as far away from the other cars as I could. It also dawned on me in this moment that most of these cars were probably empty, since most people would probably be out at the lake, as this is a boat launch. It didn't help too that they looked huge. I'm 95 pounds at 5 feet tall, and the boyfriend that I was meeting was not much bigger. I continued trying to joke the whole thing away, but these men were not laughing. The driver was getting angrier and angrier the longer we spoke. I was getting annoyed too, making less jokes, telling them more straight up to just leave me alone, but they just wouldn't leave. I'm not sure if it was out of fear or pure annoyance, but adrenaline kicked in hard at this point. And I just started screaming at them, "Fuck my boyfriend. I'm gonna beat your ugly asses myself if you don't get the hell out of my face in 10 seconds. As I dramatically threw off my seatbelt, pulled my seat away from the steering wheel and pretended to start climbing out of my passenger seat, as they still had my driver's side door blocked. It was at this point that they hurried off yelling about how nobody's friendly anymore. And thank God that they didn't hang around long enough to see my tiny self hop out of my car, or the size of my friend. So I literally just got off work about an hour ago, and I'm honestly debating if I even want to go back tomorrow. So I work for a food truck, and our trucks are based out of a joint building. The building is a really old historical building. It used to be an old skating rink back in the 60s or around that general time period. But now the building is composed of the food truck business, a bakery and a solar panel company, all located in different sections, mind you. The bakers that come overnight to do their work have told me that they've experienced strange things like disembodied voices and things disappearing and reappearing, and everyone just being confused but eventually getting used to the activity. There was one elderly baker that told me that he would hear the sound of roller skates rolling across the floor or footsteps coming from the stairs when he was working alone at night. And it didn't just happen once. I always hate coming in late at night and finishing up work while my manager finishes the CDL inside the office. I'm normally pretty okay when I'm alone anywhere, but I absolutely hate being alone in there specifically. I've never experienced anything creepy at my job. That is, until this night. I brushed off all the paranormal stories that the bakers would tell me and not pay any mind to it, especially when I'm alone at work. So basically, I finished up some dishes and I locked the doors. I flicked the lights off and started making my way towards the exit at the end of the large hallway. I turned around to close the door behind me and to lock it, when suddenly I paused, and I noticed something that, honestly, I will never be able to unsee. At the end of the hall towards the baking area, I saw this really tall, solid black figure of a man. It looked like he was wearing a suit and a hat, maybe. He was towering too, probably like 8 feet tall. My heart and stomach instantly just dropped, and my body just felt like it was vibrating. My eyes were probably as wide as a barn owl's, and I got a cold sweat in my hands almost instantly. I didn't breathe or gulp or anything. I was honestly just scared stiff. He didn't move or anything, and he just stood there, ominously. I couldn't see his face, but just his silhouette. His silhouette was also just pitch black, like the blackest black I've ever seen. I don't know how long I was staring at whatever it was, but I closed the door as soon as my brain and body would allow me. I locked it, and then I just went straight to my car. I feel bad for not telling my manager that I left, but I just didn't want to sit around any longer, especially since we're surrounded by woods here. I had the creeps all the way home, and I still do now, and I really do not want to go back there. This is not my story, but my boss's story. She told me the story a while ago as well, and I thought that you guys would enjoy it. So, she has 4 children, and when they were younger, she was driving along in one of those 7-seater people carriers when it broke down on the side of the motorway. She pulled over onto the hard shoulder and put on her hazard lights, got the kids out of the car and behind the barrier, and called the AA and her husband, all the standard stuff. About 10 or 20 minutes later, a car pulls up behind her with a rather good-looking chap in it. He says that he lives just off the next turning and had seen her and decided to circle back to see if she needed any help. All the way through this, my boss says that he didn't throw up any red flags. He just seemed genuinely concerned about the kids being on the side of the road and offered to take her back to his for a cup of tea to wait for the AA. He even said that you can call the AA and your husband to tell them where you are just to be safe. Again, my boss is very sweet and kind and thinks the best of people, and still no red flags. She turns him down, only because she had 4 kids with her. She said that if she'd been on her own, she probably would have taken him up on the offer, as he seemed so genuinely kind. She turned him down because she didn't want to take the children back to the stranger's house, not because of mistrust. He sort of pushed it a little bit more and then just shrugged and left. A couple of weeks later, though, she saw his photo in the paper. He had stopped to help another woman who had broken down, and he had murdered her after offering her a lift. To this day, she maintains that she genuinely didn't see any red flags, and the only reason she's alive is because of her kids. About 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and trying to figure out what to do next. I went to college on an athletics scholarship, and I was just as interested in enjoying my college experience as I was completing it. I ended up with a communications degree, average grades, and pretty much no experience. I was working just as a door host or a bouncer at a smaller bar or lounge in a casino. I worked at said bar Wednesday to Sunday from around 7 PM to 3 AM. My job was basically to just greet people coming in, check IDs, break up fights, and remove people who got out of hand while maintaining a professional and friendly manner. Now, there was a man that started coming into the bar on the off nights, Wednesday or Thursday when it was slow. He would come in both nights one week and then not come in again for 3 weeks or so, and then he would do the same thing always on the off nights. Usually he would talk to me a couple of times throughout the night when he was just there, just normal small talk. It was never awkward too, and he was always well dressed in a suit, or at least a button-up shirt and slacks. He was clean, had an athletic build, no visible tattoos or piercings, and a shaved head. Now, I'm not into men, but I would guess that he was a good-looking man in his late 30s. And well, the last night I saw him, the conversation was a bit different. So, he came in on an off night like normal, and eventually came up to talk to me by the door. The conversation started off normal, but eventually he asked me if I enjoyed what I did at the bar. I did the typical, it's not that bad, it's mostly easy, dissembling what I felt was polite conversation. He asked me how long I'd been a bouncer for, asked if I thought about making any more money, and eventually dragged out of me that no, I didn't particularly enjoy being a bouncer and didn't know what I was going to do with my future. And at this point, he looked me straight in the face and said, "Well, you could kill people." While maintaining our eye contact, I paused and waited for some type of joke or smile or something that would turn this into a failed attempt at a joke. But no, there was nothing. He seemed 100% serious, and there was no smile, no joke, nothing but him just staring at me, waiting for me to respond. At this point, I tried to tell him the first thing that came to mind. I said, I'm pretty sure I don't have the skill set for what I think you're suggesting." He said, "Yeah, but you could learn all about that. Think about it. You could travel, work once or twice a month, and get paid really well." Well, strangely, at that point in my life, it was an intriguing idea. I immediately thought of some sort of police setup and all the shadowy hitman handler betrayals that I've seen in every hitman movie ever. So I told him, "Nah, I just don't think that's for me." And then he said, "Okay," and just left. And I worked there for another year, and I never saw him again. I want to preface this story by stating that I've had my fair share of encounters with creepy men. This situation, however, scared the life out of me, and it's the first time that I genuinely felt like my life was in danger. So my husband and I had to drive 17 hours last week to North Carolina for a wedding. It was an exhausting week, and we basically spent the entire time just rushing from one family gathering to another. We were staying in a motel for the time that we were there, and we had already been at this motel for a few days by the time that the day of the actual wedding rolled around. The day of the wedding was absolutely hectic. We were rushing around trying to get ready to leave for the venue, and my husband got ready before me so he could do some last-minute things before we had to leave, and that left me alone in our motel room to get ready before he returned. It was brutally hot outside, and I decided to do my hair and makeup in just my underwear so I wouldn't be sweating in my nice dress the whole time. The way that this motel was laid out, the sink and mirror were in the general open area of the room, with the toilet and the shower in another room. So anyone walking by our window could see me standing at the mirror. However, I did have the curtains closed, but these curtains were a little bit sheer, so you could technically see the shadow of someone walking by on the outside, or could maybe see the silhouette of me inside the room as well. So I was curling my hair in the mirror when I noticed the silhouette of a man walking by the room window. As he's passing my window, I see him stop and start trying to look into my window. At first, I thought it was my husband trying to see if I was ready, so I paid it no mind. But the longer the guy stood there, bobbing his head around trying to get a better look through the curtains, I began to realize that it was not my husband, because obviously, why wouldn't he just come in? Now I'm starting to get a little bit freaked out, I must admit, but before I could do anything, I watch as this guy starts to go for my room door. My utter shock and horror came when he actually was able to open the door too and walked inside. Before my husband left, he'd obviously forgot to pull the door shut all the way till it clicked into its lock. He was really upset with himself when I told him this later as well. So now I'm face to face with this man, and I'm in my underwear no less, who's at least 6 feet tall and just standing in my room. I thought to myself, this is it, he's going to attack you. That's a very scary realization to have, I tell you, and I also thought to myself, you're going to have to burn his eye sockets out with this curling iron if you want to survive. For a few seconds, probably only a second or two, but it felt a lot longer, he just stood there staring at me like I was a piece of meat and he was starving, ready to pounce on me like prey. He then began to smile the most evil-looking toothy grin that I've ever seen and started mumbling something under his breath. I didn't make out what he was saying completely, but I did make out the words "pretty lady" and "come here." I don't know if it was the fight or flight response, but I suddenly got pissed and I charged towards him, ready to strike him with the hot curling iron. I screamed as loud as I could, "Get the hell out of here." It must have startled him because he jumped back out onto the balcony of the motel. I saw this as my chance and I ran for the door. I luckily was able to get to the door and slam it shut, right before he was able to make his second attempt at entering inside. I immediately collapsed on the floor, just sobbing after this, and I was literally too scared to move from that spot until my husband came back about 15 minutes later. I told him the whole thing, and he was obviously freaked out. He initially wanted to find the guy so that he could beat the crap out of him, but I refused to let him leave my side. He must have apologized 1,000 times during the rest of our trip for not making sure that the door was locked before leaving, but I told him that the day and that whole trip really was so rushed that I could see how it happened. We eventually went to the motel management and told them the whole story, and the police were obviously called, and I gave them a description of the guy so that they could see if there was someone who was staying in the motel that looked like that. After going around to the few motel occupants, they said that no one matched his description and concluded that he wasn't staying here. Obviously, we were late to the wedding that day, and the whole experience just ruined what should have been a really happy time. We planned on staying another day before our long drive home, but we both just wanted out of there as soon as possible at that moment. So we skipped most of the reception and we went back to the motel, packed up, and we just left. I am usually always so vigilant with locking my doors, especially when I'm home alone. It just goes to show you, I guess, that all it takes is that one time that you forget to check your locks, and that certain unwanted guest is inviting themselves right in. About 1.5 years back, I was a sheriff's deputy that had been transferred to the jail division. I started out on night shift, and being the most recent addition, I spent a lot of nights in the housing bubble. Sometimes I would be sitting there after lights out, and I would see out of the corner of my eye the orange striped shirt of an inmate running by housing. I would think to myself, why is the inmate worker just messing around like that? Then I would realize that I didn't have an inmate worker that night. Or, on occasion, I could swear that I saw someone walking on the upper level of one of the pods as well. I got to a point where I would honestly just blow it off as me being overly tired, but then one night, something happened that I just couldn't brush off anymore. So I was sitting in the back of the housing watching YouTube. I would usually watch Cops after lights out. And well, I started hearing tapping, like someone was tapping their fingers on the control desk. A steady and yet quick 3 taps and then 3 taps again, and I'm thinking to myself, what's wrong with the computer? Why is it making that noise? So I'm staring at the main desk, and the trash can underneath the desk just flips up about 5 inches from the ground and moves to the side about a foot and then sits back down, like someone was moving it out of their way. And I just kind of sat there. I didn't have any feelings of dread or fear. It almost felt like just another deputy was in there with me. I really don't feel like whatever it was meant me harm, but it was definitely an interesting moment, to say the least. So I'd gone to bed for the night, but since I'm a pretty light sleeper, the sound of thunder awoke me about every hour. Around 3 a.m, I decided that I just wasn't going to get much sleep tonight, and went downstairs to get a cup of water. I remember a strange feeling that night, like the air was charged, which I figure was probably just related to the storm. I make my way slowly down the steps, not wanting to wake my family. I enter into the dining room, which consists of a large table in the center of the room. Avoiding the table, I step to the left when a sudden flash of lightning illuminates the room. And that's when I notice the man standing not even 1 foot further to the left in the very corner of the dining room, looking down on me. He was white with black hair and, well, piercing blue eyes that glowed even after the lightning went out. He was well dressed and didn't seem to be wearing anything that struck me as out of place for the time period. It was his smile, though, that just made my blood run cold. He was grinning from ear to ear as if he was happy to see me, yet a negative energy just seemed to envelop the room. I was frozen from fear, unable to move and unable to think, unable to scream, and all I could do was watch as the blue eyes seemed to slowly melt into the wall until there was just no trace that the man had even been there. I scrambled back up the stairs, locked my door, and hid until morning, but I was unable to shake the feeling of just being watched the whole night. Daylight eventually came, and I checked the whole house for the strange man that I'd seen the night before, but he had vanished. There hadn't been any kind of break-in and nothing was taken, and oddly, my family security system was still perfectly intact. and nothing had been tripped. I'm a foreign student studying in a small town in Germany. At the time this particular event happened, however, I was still living in Berlin. I lived in an older apartment with an older lady who rented the unit to me. The kitchen connected the two apartments that she owns, so we technically live in separate units, but we share the kitchen. The star of our story, however, is not the lady. She's really nice, and I still even talk to her sometimes. The apartment building, though, is 5 stories high with a staircase, no elevator. We live in the 2nd story. The lady who rented the unit to me, though, has always had a problem with the neighbours right downstairs because they were always noisy and they fought a lot, and when they were on their balcony, it always smelled heavily of smoke. The neighbours downstairs are an older couple, probably in their late 50s or early 60s if I had to guess. I didn't know much about them except for their phone number and their names, which the landlady scribbled on a piece of paper for me in case they ever got too loud so I could call them. It turns out, I never needed the number to get to know them because one afternoon, as I was cooking, the doorbell in the lady's apartment rang, but she was out. And not long after that, it rang on my side. So I thought it must be her trying to reach out or something, so I looked at the peephole and there stood some older lady, so I thought it must just be the landlady's friend. I opened the door and, to my surprise, there stood the said lady without any pants. As in, she was with a shirt but was in her underwear. Now, at that point, I was only in Germany for a couple of months, so I wasn't really sure if this was normal, and my German was not also that good. This lady was mumbling something that I could barely make out, but since she rang the bell on the landlady's side first, I assumed she was looking for the landlady, and I tried telling her, with the best German that I could, that the landlady was out and will probably not be back until later. But this lady, she just stood there mumbling something. I really couldn't understand her, so I just shook my head apologetically and smiled. She began gesturing to me to come with her, like she wanted to show me something. So I quickly turned off the stove and I followed her downstairs after grabbing my keys. She then started to ring a bell on the door right below us. And it was at this point that I was like, so this is the neighbour. But then came another wave of shock because after she repeatedly rang the bell, a man came to the door with no piece of clothing on except for his socks. I tried really hard not to make my weirded out face very apparent because I wasn't sure about German customs yet at that point and I didn't want to be rude. And all I could think about was, so this must be the husband. She gestured for me to come in and I was starting to wonder what her actual intention in calling me all the way down here was. I thought it was something important for the landlady, but she just offered me something to drink and I declined, but she insisted on getting me water anyway and walked into the kitchen. Now, I'm still standing near the front door with this man who is now staring at me top to bottom. To be honest, he looks kind of drunk and right at that moment, I remembered how the landlady used to tell me that all they do is fight and get drunk. So I just smiled at him and stood there awkwardly, but he decided to suddenly be very friendly because he kind of just grabbed my shoulder and dragged me inside of the house to show me different rooms and the balcony and their small garden and everything. I mean, the house itself is beautiful, I must admit, a real contrast to the people living in it. It was very uncomfortable though, to say the least, because he was very much naked still and staying at a very close proximity to me. His arm was on my shoulders and he was just looking at my face so closely that I could feel his breath on my face. He then proceeded by asking if they had a beautiful garden, and I just said yes and kind of laughed awkwardly. Thank God the wife came out from the kitchen at this point, and then she started shouting at him for doing what he was doing. She told him that it was no way to treat a guest, and she handed me a glass of water, all the while still wearing no pants. I never drank the water, and I quickly excused myself, saying that I needed to check my cooking upstairs. After some debate, I got out of the house, but the lady is still holding on to me at the door, pleading that I could stay a while and sit at the garden with her. I was ready to come up with more excuses before someone came through the front door of the building and interrupted. It was the young man that lives 2 stories above us. Apparently, he just got back from grocery shopping and he somehow dealt with them and told me to go back upstairs. So I went and waited upstairs to thank him. He was done talking to them after about 2 minutes, and he came upstairs to ask if I was alright and told me not to get mixed up with those folks because they're apparently known to be very problematic. So yeah, he saved my day and I thanked him for that. After that experience, though, I kind of just hurried my way up to my apartment every time that I got back from somewhere so I didn't run into them. I actually met her once more after that. She looked sober and was actually wearing pants this time. She didn't seem to recognize me though, and thankfully, I have since moved far away from there. So I've shared before one of my more recent experiences, and I experienced that activity in my family's last house that was so bad that we actually had to move out in the end. So I figured that I should share a few more of the stories. So the house was normal at first, but the first thing that really was a red flag were the footsteps. And they'd usually happen when only one person was home. I remember hearing them multiple times. It sounded like someone walking and sometimes even running down the small upstairs hallway that led to my sister's bedroom. But one day, I was at summer school in the middle of the day, about 1 p.m, and I get a text from my sister asking if I've heard footsteps upstairs. I tell her yes, and she tells me that she thinks she's hearing them but doesn't respond after that. After I get home, my mum tells me that she came home to my sister sitting outside the house. Apparently, she had heard loud footsteps and went upstairs to investigate, finding my parents' bedroom door open. But this is strange too because my mum always closes it before she leaves the house. My sister then closed the door, only to hear what sounded like loud running coming from inside the room. And needless to say, that was enough to scare her straight outside. About a few months pass, and the footsteps are a common phenomenon at this point. My mum tells me that my sister's phone even got flung off her bed by itself at one point. But anyways, it's late at night, and I normally get up to get some water or snacks. My bedroom is the only one downstairs. Everyone else is asleep upstairs. The kitchen is only 3 or 4 feet from my room. I open my door and I'm basically just standing there, and after walking in, the pantry light is on, which is odd because my dad would always turn it off before he went up to bed. I brushed it off though, as maybe one of my sisters went and got some food, same idea as me. I step into the pantry to see what snacks we have available when I hear a drawer open. I can hear the wheels hit the end of the track and some metal clang around briefly, meaning the drawer had been pulled open all the way. I peek my head out and, sure enough, the silverware drawer is wide open. I closed that drawer and then I just ran back to my room. Weird occurrences continued, and my mum constantly complains how lights in her bedroom will turn on by themselves, and she'd even see a shadow of a little girl running around her bed. The master bedroom seemed to be a hotspot for activity, and I had no idea what people meant when they said that they felt that they were being watched, until being in that room. I always had the urge to look into the mirror or check over my back. You could just kind of tell that something was there. It's hard to explain, but if you've experienced it, you'll know what I'm talking about. This comes into play late one night too. So, I'd been over at a friend's house the next city over, about a 15-minute drive. I often get home late and everyone's asleep. It's about 11:30, so I quietly unlock the door and walk in when I see my mum standing in the front room holding one of our dogs. My mum is usually out by 9 and very rarely gets up and leaves her room, which meant that something strange was definitely happening. And she tells me that she saw a huge shadow figure, like a full man standing in the hall that leads to a bathroom. Also, for whatever reason, she left my little sister in the master bed by herself, and my dad was asleep on the couch. I can't just leave her in there if there's some huge shadow man, demon or poltergeist or whatever it is in there with her. So I go back upstairs with my mum and check on my sister. She's fast asleep and my mum is visually shaken and points out that her shower door was not open when she left the room. Sure enough, it was pulled wide open at this point. Eventually, we all just went to the bed. There's nothing we can really do, and we just try to forget it. I have a few more stories if anyone wants to hear them. I strongly believe that my family is followed by something, but I can't be too sure. When I was 14, I was taking 3D modeling class at my online school and had a teacher whom I'll call John Doe for the sake of privacy. He was around 60 at the time, and John Doe was a little, well, friendly. He would always ask to Skype and would talk about subjects unrelated to school. If I only had my audio on, he'd ask for me to turn on my video. He'd also ask me to lower my camera when I was wearing tank tops and whatnot. He'd say that I was the most beautiful girl in Hawaii and would tell me how lovely I looked and be very complimentary. He sort of opened up to me as well in a way that was unusual for a teacher to do so. He also always gave me A+, so I appreciated that. But I knew something was weird when I never had an imperfect score, ever. My 14-year-old self had never had someone open up in that way, so I just went along with it. It actually kind of intrigued me, if I'm being honest. I didn't mind too, because he always gave me perfect grades and was always flattering towards me. He'd look at my chest when we were on Skyping and would always compliment my physical appearance. He'd say that we should meet sometime in person and asked where I lived. He'd say that he'd swing by, even though I was far too young to just hang out and talk. He said that he'd love to see me in person, and that just never really materialized though. So this complimentary behavior and Skyping though, it went on for months until he just randomly disappeared from school and Skype. I started researching his name and found out that he had commented on girls around my age's YouTube accounts with similar jargon. I don't know the reason as to why he was dropped or resigned from the school. All I know is that he was, and I never heard from him again or of him again. When I was that age, I didn't think anything was wrong with his behavior, but now I feel it's apparent that it was definitely inappropriate, and I'm glad that nothing happened. This story happened when I was 12 years old. I'm female and 25, and I remember that it was a Saturday night around 9 or 10 p.m. during summertime. I owned one dog at the time. His name was Benny. My parents decided that night they feel like going for a walk around the block, walking Benny, and asked me whether I wanted to join them. I said no because I wanted to play PWI on my PC, Perfect World International. My parents were okay with leaving me alone since the walk wouldn't take longer than 30 minutes tops. As my parents would get dressed to leave the house, I logged into PWI and looked around at my guild and global chat to see if anyone was on. For some reason, no one was, so I decided to join my parents. I get dressed, I put Benny on his leash, and we all leave. I'd like to mention too that I lived in an apartment building that had 10 floors and we lived on the first floor. I'm not really sure how to explain it too, but you have the basement of the building and then the first row of the apartments. But basically you enter the building and you're already facing apartments, and I lived in the very first one. I remember always hating that too, because whoever would pass by our door, we would hear them at any time of the day or night. Whoever was lurking at night, we would hear them as well, and it was somewhat eerie to live on floor 0. Anyway, we leave the house and my dad closes the door. We had 3 keyholes and a steel bar that would block the door from the inside. The bar covered half of the door. Precautions were my father's obsession. We exit the building and enjoy our walk. After 15 minutes, we realize that the wind has changed from warm summer wind to incoming storm wind. My mum makes the call to go back home as Benny already did all of his duties, so we all return. We open the building door, climb the 5 stairs to our door and attempt to open it, and my father does the following. He unlocks the first 3 locks, and then attempts to unlock the metal door that holds the door locked. And at that attempt, my father pauses, turns around at us with the most serious face that I've ever seen on him, and whispers for us to call the police and ring the neighbor's door. My mum goes to the second apartment, and the neighbor, who I'll call Ted, comes out asking my father what had happened. My dad whispered to him, covering the see-through hole of the door, that someone was in our house. He or they are holding the door. Please stay here with my family and make sure not to open it. I'll be back. After saying that, I see my father rush all by himself around the building, in the dark. I say dark because we didn't have any streetlights on the side of our apartment facing the block garden. My dad disappears into the darkness and I go outside too, not following him too much, but only to hear if he's in trouble. He's my dad, don't judge me. and as soon as I get out, I hear him shout, "Hey you, come back. Who the hell do you think you are? I've called the police." At the same time I hear him shout, I look at Ted, who manages to open the door and enter the house at that point, and I go after them and enter my house. It no longer felt like my house too, because in just 15 minutes while we were walking, the home invaders made a complete mess of our house. All of our shelves and wardrobes were pulled out, our clothes scattered just all over the house. Benny's dry food was all over the floor, indicating that they must have tripped in his bowls or something, probably not knowing that we owned a dog. But what scared me the most was how organized they were. I say they too because after seeing the disaster that was left behind, we knew that it was pretty much impossible for just one person to hold the door, steal, and organize what they would want to take with them. I also say organized because the thieves put in our living room, all packed and ready, what they wanted but couldn't steal. On the couch, they placed our laptops, one of our TVs, my father's collections of coins, our phones, chargers, wallets, and even my father's camera. He's a photographer, and that week he had to attend a wedding. They didn't have enough time to steal all of that, so they just settled with one of my mum's jewelry and pocket money and whatnot. After seeing this, in my silly child mind, I rushed to my room to check my piggy bank. I always saved up money from whatever chores I did. It wasn't much, but it was my work and savings, and at that time I thought that they stole it too. When I enter my room, I see the metal bars covering my windows are cut open, and my window's broken, which means that this is how they entered, through my room. My room is the only room facing the side of the building, and the one most secluded from views. Needless to say, I never felt safe in my room, in which I had to live for the next 10 years of my life in, until I moved into my own place with my fiancée. The police arrive though, and they start throwing white dust. I have no idea what it actually is, but it was all over our house to find fingerprints. They take pictures, take our statements, analyze my room and window. They were unable to catch the home invaders, but were able to tell that this invasion was not the only one in our neighborhood. During that month, allegedly, another 4 houses were broken into, one of them being the home of a cop, not related with the cops at our home. They told us that the invaders analyzed their victims, learned their schedule, even knew where the children's rooms were, as they seemed to be entering the houses through the children's windows. All the families affected by them had children. But they didn't expect us to be back that soon and panicked, hence one of them was holding the door with his body so the others could flee. The person after which my dad was shouting was probably the one holding the door and escaping last through my broken window. I don't know what could have happened if I didn't change my mind and give up on raiding for gears and PW I would probably have come face to face with these invaders, and I'm really happy that I didn't, and I hope to God that I never meet them again. So this happened about 2 years ago now. I got divorced and moved in with my mum on our family farm in rural South Georgia. The house we moved into was my grandmother's childhood home. It's huge and surrounded by our produce field. When I first moved with my boys, aged 2 and 4 at the time, they honestly loved it. It has so many rooms and had so much more space to run and play than our crappy little apartment in Orlando. As time went on though, they started saying little things such as, "There are monsters upstairs." And the funny thing is, every morning I would shut the doors upstairs. They unsettled me too. Every morning I would wake up and they would be open again. I always chalked it up to the old house just having drafts. But eventually, the boys didn't like being alone in certain rooms, or in the house alone at all. During the time I spent there, I did notice little things, and now that I look back, I think they must have seen more than I did. After about 2 years, though, I finally found a good man. Well, we started off slow with small little casual dates. He even included the boys, which was very surprising and different. We were inseparable, even if it was just sitting around the house. One night, though, we decided to sit outside and talk. The boys and my mum were inside asleep. My room was across the house, so we decided to call my phone and put it on speaker. We muted his phone and also put it on speaker. We sat on the porch and we talked for hours until early in the morning, when all of a sudden, we both froze mid-conversation because we could hear a man speaking through the phone in my bedroom. He isn't saying something that we can make out, but the voice is terrifying. But the creepy thing is that my son is sleepily mumbling back to the man. It was at this point that we both just looked at each other and took off, bursting into the house to find both of my boys still sound asleep and the room silently empty. I don't know why, but it bothers me after all these years, because who was talking to my son that night? This event took place not too long ago. It happened on a Wednesday night when me and my best friend decided to go clubbing. Neither of us are actually club people, but it was free for ladies and a local rock band was performing. They're pretty famous around here, so we figured why not? It's been a while since we've gone out at night anyway. Nothing particularly interesting happened at the club as it was heavily overpopulated. But when the show was over, we decided to leave as it started getting even more populated with new people coming in. It was hard to keep up a conversation because we literally had to scream over each other and, in worst cases, even push to get past the mats. So instead, we just walked around the old town and chit-chatted a bit. The old town was fairly quiet, except for the few ambulances trying to aid a drunk guy who hit his head on the pavement or something. After a while, we both decided to just go home, and I had to get a taxi because it's quite a long trip, 1 hour at least, and there's no way that I was going to walk this path alone, as it tends to get quite dangerous at night. She lived closer to the city centre and in another direction, so she decided to just walk home instead. After I had ordered my taxi, we parted ways, and I had to wait 10 minutes at least, so I decided to sit down on a bench nearby the bus stop, and this is where it began. So I was scanning the area when I glanced over to the bus stop on the other side of the road, and I noticed a dark greyish SUV parking right next to it. And right as I looked towards it, he started waving for me to come closer. I was confused and looked around again to see if there were more people around, and when I glanced again, he tried to pull the same gesture, but I didn't respond like before. And that's when he slowly started to drive. I had a bad gut feeling instantly kick in, and then he pulled right up next to me, as I feared. He rolled his windows down and yelled, "I'm Ricardo." I'm not even sure if that's his real name. The guy seemed to be way older than me, almost twice my age in fact. He appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, and seemed to be either Puerto Rican or perhaps Colombian or something. Now, I know sometimes people tend to pick others up if their destination is on their radar, but I had a strong gut feeling that he had other things in mind. When I told him that I was waiting for a taxi, he kept insisting that I should cancel it and get in his car. He also called me baby a few times, and the red flags definitely kicked in even more at this point. He asked for my name, and I blurted out a random name that popped up in my head at the time. He took out his hand and wanted to shake hands, and I stood up slowly, but something just told me not to do it. And that was when I got a small peek into his car, and I'm pretty sure that there appeared to be some sort of ropes or wires on his back seat. And there was also a silver light slightly shining from a back seat in what I assumed to be duct tape. I immediately froze and told him that I'd rather not get too close with strangers. He tried to reassure me that he was a good guy and wouldn't hurt me. He started getting frustrated at this point, and for some reason he thought that if he would say things like, "But you're so beautiful, baby," at least twice, that I'd cool down and just get into his car or something. But no way was I ever going to get in with him. He seemed to get angry now, but as it took place in the city centre and there were quite a few cars and other people around, he just asked me if I was sure for the last time, as if he'd hope I'd change my mind or something to his offers that he made, and I blew him off for the last time, and that's when he finally left. He didn't even say goodbye or anything too, just kind of drove off like the wind. That's when I realised that he must have been waiting in that spot where I first had noticed him. I didn't see any cars passing by while I was sitting at the bus stop, and it's also the exact spot where most people would go after a night out, to order a taxi or perhaps go to McDonald's, whatever floats their boat. The club is located just southeast from the bus stop. A lot of girls were wasted that night, so he most likely wanted to take advantage of that too. When the taxi finally arrived, I texted my best friend, and I froze when she texted me that a creepy guy in a large SUV had stopped and mumbled something to her, and she ignored him and just kept on walking. Apparently, he attempted to follow her and kept shouting something, but since she had earphones on, she couldn't really make out what he was saying. When she ran in between the houses, he was gone. Luckily, she got home safely, and so did I. But I guess the moral of the story is always be aware of your surroundings and listen to your gut feeling. I'd like to think that I was just overreacting, but something tells me that it would have been very different if we were in a more private and secluded area. Several years ago, I was working in a shopping mall as a marketing manager, and my job was very much in the public eye in my community. My main job was to get people into the shopping centre, mostly by hosting events such as fashion shows, music events, and beauty pageants. Mostly that I presented myself as well, so I was well known around town. Now, I had a group of friends that I'd known since high school, and we saw each other pretty regularly. But when I was around 29, I had been married for 4 years and had just had my son. My friend Chrissy, not a real name by the way, had unfortunately just ended her second marriage. It was a running joke in the group that she really liked wedding cakes. She had just hooked up with a new man as well and wanted us to get together that weekend so she could introduce him. And in typical Chrissy fashion, there was around a month in time moving from husband number 2 to moving in with new man Jake. Again, not his real name. The meeting went off without an issue and we all attended, muttering between ourselves that it would never last. He was a lot older than she was, himself, recently divorced with a very interfering ex as well. He was also definitely no oil painting. Around 3 weeks after though, Chrissy announced that she was pregnant. One day I walked into my office at the shopping mall to find a large bunch of roses and a teddy on my desk though. I received flowers regularly from suppliers, so it wasn't really a surprise, but the teddy was definitely new. I am not, and I never have been a teddy kind of girl. The small card just said, "I can't wait to see you again." I asked the secretary if she knew where they came from, and she said that she had no clue. They were delivered to the security office before any of us arrived. And it was at this time that the phone calls started. Direct to my office phone, skipping the reception. Only a few people knew this number, and at first there were just silent calls with just heavy breathing on the line. After a few days of silence, he started to talk. Things like, "I'm watching you. I like your skirt. You're beautiful. I wish you were my girlfriend." Each time I slammed the phone down, the voice was gravelly though, and it sounded as if the person was trying to make his voice deeper than it was. After daily calls for a week, I went to my boss who had the number changed, and the calls thankfully stopped after this. Around a month after this, we hosted a get-together at my house and Chrissy and Jake attended. As he walked through the door and greeted me, I froze. As soon as he spoke, I knew immediately that it was him. Chrissy was by now very pregnant, and I really didn't want to upset her, so I never told her. I confronted him about it, and he apologized and said that he didn't mean to creep me out. They left early that day, and they moved to another town a few months after. The marriage did happen, and I was invited, but I declined. The marriage lasted a year, and Chrissy is now engaged again. In fact, she has been 3 times since her and Jake divorced. I did tell her about it a few years later, and she said that she understood me not telling her at the time. She would have not believed me anyway. He must have got my number from her address book or something, and he had apparently done this to another woman at their church, straight after they moved. I've worked night audit for a new Bampton in one of the safest areas near me for a little over 2 years now. It's got direct access to 2 main highways. I've had a fair share of creepy guests and weirdos, but most were just easy check-ins and fixes, and then they're on their way. However, last night changed everything up. As safe as my property is, we do have a shady $40 a night motel on the other side of our building. There's been some stuff that's gone down at both places, and occasionally their guests try to sneak into my motel for a free breakfast. I have on 2 occasions seen the police raid both hotels and spend all night searching for people who ran and collected evidence, I presume. It's been a while since I've seen such entertainment though, so that's been nice. But anyway, it's about 2:30 AM and I'm getting ready to run my night audit. My doors are locked and this guy who is dirty but in a construction worker kind of way walks up. We have plenty of construction workers stay here as we aren't far from their site, and we're rated number 1 in the area, so I open the door for him and ask if he needs a room before I run the audit. He grins at me, but it's anything but a warm welcome. It looks fake and almost threatening in fact, and he looks at me for a second and then says that I have a guest in room 144. His wording caught me off guard. Not many say that they have a guest in a room. It's usually I'm here for, I'm meeting so-and-so. And the second issue is that we don't have a room 144, and neither do any of the brand names in my area. I've been to all the immediate ones, so I inform him that we don't have a room 144, and he looks at me for a second and then says, "Oh shucks, guess I got stood up," giggles and then just walks out the door. Well, thinking that this is very odd, but whatever, I go back to running the audit. As I'm finishing up, the phone rings and a guy starts chuckling and says that there's a car in your parking lot with its lights on. Oh, and by the way, I'm the guy that just got stood up. Now, 1, it's been 30 minutes since he walked out my door. Why is he still in the parking lot? And 2, nobody has come or gone since him, and there were no lights on in the parking lot before he came in. And 3, why do I need to know that you're the guy who got stood up? I brush it off as odd, but my gut is telling me that something weird is going on. I wait about 5 minutes and then walk around the front of the building from the inside and see no cars in my parking lot with lights on. It's not very well lit, so it would be easy to spot. Back at the front desk, waiting for the audit to finish up its thing so I can get ready to start breakfast, and the phone rings again. I pick it up and it's the creepy guy again telling me that there's a light on in the parking lot. It's been at least another 20 minutes since the last call, so again, why would he still be in the parking lot? I feel I may have missed something between the windows, so I go to my locker door, peek my head out real quick to do a swift scan of the lot, and my eye catches someone standing in the corner of the parking lot. It's the creepy guy, and he's just squatting there, watching me. There's also no car with its lights on, and I run back inside, double check that the doors are locked, and I start to feel this sense of panic and something really bad is about to happen. I have never felt this feeling while on my shift, and only once before in my life, and let's just say I have physical scars from what happened that time. So I get back to the front desk and I call the local PD and I explain the situation to dispatch, and they ask if it's ever happened before. I tell them no, but also inform them that I'm the only employee on the property and I would like for them to scan the parking lot and check in with me if possible. PD pulls up and wants to get a description from me before searching the area. And well, as he's getting out of the car, he notices movement. Creepy guy took off. The cop walks in a little nervous and tells me what he just saw while using his radio to call for assistance. 3 more show up and they discuss it, searching my parking lot and the 2 neighbor parking lots. They seem to come up with nothing, but stick around to patrol the parking lot until the sun came up. PD has stopped by once since my shift started tonight to check on me and said that they would be in the area if I needed anything. And while here, they tell me that a total of 3 guys fled the parking lot from different directions last night. He believes that the creepy guy was trying to lure me into the parking lot, away from the door, so that I would end up trapped between the 3 of them. He didn't go much further as to what could have happened from there, but honestly, I don't want to dwell on it either. I was 13 years old in 2003, and my friend and I were bored and decided to have some weird fun one night. Now, I've always had interest in the supernatural and occult-like things. I've always been very empathic and in tune to things in a way that's hard to explain. But anyways, I didn't have a real Ouija board, so we used paper and drew one and then used a quarter for the planchette. Well, we asked if anyone was there and if they wanted to talk. Nothing, of course, for a few minutes, when suddenly the feathers on my dream catcher in my room started to sway, with no window or air conditioner on too. We asked again if anyone was there, when suddenly it felt like there was a pull. We allowed ourselves to let go and just see what happened, and it went to yes. We asked what its name was, and we felt pulled towards D and C, just the letters D and C, which was odd. A minute or so later, my grandma called for us that she was ready to go as we were about to go to the mall. We stood up and walked out of my room. My friend looked at my face and gasped and told me to look in the mirror. And I had a 2-inch or so scratch on my face that definitely wasn't there before. We were a little freaked out, but mostly confused. But we went shopping and my grandma asked us what happened, and I told her that I really didn't know. The next morning the scratch was gone too, but after that night, things got pretty weird. So my room for some reason started to feel colder than the rest of the house. Even my grandma commented a few weeks later that my room was just cold as death. My dog stopped coming into my room as well. He would stand at my doorway and I would call for him and he would just look at me and then leave. He might come in rarely for a minute or so, but he would never stay. And then I started to get feelings like I just wasn't alone in there. The air felt thicker, the dark seemed darker, and when I was home alone, I would hear things, footsteps and creaking. One night, though, it all came to a head. My grandparents went out to dinner, and I stayed home. I was downstairs playing on the desktop and instant messaging my friend. The bathroom door next to me that had been shut tight made a clicking sound, and the knob had turned, and the door opened slowly. I got up and slammed it shut, and I went back to playing my game and instant messaging when I heard a loud crash. I got up and saw my grandma's crucifix that had been hanging on the wall had crashed to the floor. I put it back and turned on as many lights in the TV and just took my mind off of it all. Around this time, my grandma, who is very Catholic, started getting into more New Age things like crystals and psychics and whatnot. She went to one, and the psychic told my grandma that she had a granddaughter who saw orbs, but that these orbs that I'd been seeing were angels protecting me. It is true that I'd been seeing a lot of flashing lights that I called orbs in those months. Fast forward a year or so, and some things happened to me that I won't go into here. Depression and hospitalizations and boarding schools. When I got home from boarding school, my grandma told me that she had spent a night in my room. She had laid down to sleep and suddenly heard a creaking noise. She said that she remembers thinking to herself, "Please don't start playing music." And then my music box just started playing. She said that she bought a lot of different incense and played a special prayer on repeat for days and basically prayer bombed the whole house. And when I returned home, my room just felt clean, like whatever had been there was gone, and it was safe. I stopped seeing orbs after that too, and I never played with a Ouija board again, but I do love the designs, I admit. I have a Ouija board mug and a Ouija board mat on my dresser. I like the symbol and I'm not afraid of them, but I will never use one again, that's for sure. I'll admit though that I've been tempted through the years to try again, hoping that maybe being better prepared I can have a safer outcome, but I just don't know if I want to take that chance of opening a door to any stranger knocking. If anyone here has had any experiences, I would sure love to hear them as well in the comments below. Thanks for listening. So, I was up north in Shepherd, Michigan. I believe that that's the name, and it's a very small town, and this was about 3 summers ago, I think. I was visiting my best friend. We were really bored because her mum grounded her from her car, and there's not really anything to do out there, so we decided to walk to downtown. I think it was about 8 or 9 p.m, I'd say, as the sun was going down at this point. The walk there was pretty long. We had to cross some dirt roads and follow a railroad track. By the time that we got there, it was dark, and I had already wanted to go home because I don't like being outside in the country in the dark. It's just really creepy. But we sat at a park for a little bit on the swings. I noticed 2 sheriff police cars parked off at the end of the tiny strip that they call downtown, parked at this old car shop. According to my friend, they were most likely looking for 2 guys who had been car hopping a few nights before. We decided to start heading back because, well, we weren't even supposed to have left the house, and her mum was threatening to lock us out for the night. It was like 10 p.m. at this point, and I wasn't looking forward to the long walk through the cornfields and railroad tracks in the pitch-black night. So we were walking past the old car place, about to turn the corner, and I heard a loud helicopter. Apparently, to my friend, it's a police helicopter looking for the car hoppers. As a city girl, I highly doubted that and thought it was pretty ridiculous, but I also grew even more paranoid, hoping that they wouldn't mistake us for the criminals. But we're passing the sheriff car, and I'm trying to act so unsuspicious, even though we didn't do anything wrong, except walk the railroad tracks, I guess. But anyways, here's where things got a bit crazy. And this is by far the most bizarre thing that has ever happened to me. So we turn the corner, and behind this downtown strip is a large grassy field, and at the far end is a forest. At the edge of where this field meets the forest was this giant rod-like thing just suspended mid-air, not much higher than the trees. It's kind of hard to describe, but it was like 2 rods on top of each other. The top one extended a little bit more to the right and the bottom one to the left. At each end had very vibrant green lights, so 2 on each end and on the top and bottom. Maybe it was just because of how dark it was being in the country, but these lights didn't shine like normal to me. The colour was just super vibrant and warm and glowed more than shined. And it was giant, like the size of a bus or 2. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. We heard a helicopter pretty loud actually, but I didn't see it anywhere. Just this thing hanging in midair. My friend, not a UFO or alien believer, thinks it's some sort of police aircraft looking for the car hoppers, which was very hard for me to believe at this point because if this was any kind of aircraft of ours, it would be locked up in Area 51 for sure. And definitely not out looking for car hoppers off a tiny little town. It didn't look like a plane as well. It was a rod. It had no wings or propellers. It made no sense how this giant heavy-looking rod thing could just sit like that in midair. It was at a weird slant too, which I couldn't understand. I already had my phone out as a flashlight, and I held my phone up to get a picture of it. And that was when this thing went spiraling towards us. Yeah, it literally spun like a fan directly at us, and you could hear the wind cutting against it. I just froze, and my face was twisted in the most ugliest way. I was just so stunned and not understanding what the hell was happening. My friend pushed my hands down so my phone was no longer pointing at the thing, and as quickly as it had started spinning towards us, it stopped. It repositioned itself, raised up a little bit, and then just started moving the opposite way, to cross over downtown, I suppose. and the helicopter that we heard had finally appeared and was in front of the rod thing, as if it was guiding it away or something. It wasn't a regular looking helicopter either, or maybe it was just my hysteria or shock that made it look distorted, but it looked much rounder. The windows were bigger and all the lights were on inside, but I couldn't see anyone in there. And all of this was happening right above our heads. My friend might have been in denial, but I knew that that wasn't from this world as soon as I saw it. And I could see the ship more clearly, and it had these intricate lines and designs on it too. Kind of like wires, but I'm not too sure. I don't remember it as clearly now, and it was really dark, but that definitely stood out to me. And the feeling of seeing something, of having something above you that isn't from us, it's a bit of a crazy feeling, let me tell you. Your brain is used to having a name for everything that we see, and once it can't recognize something as something from humans, it's just a very strange, overwhelming feeling, and possibly a feeling that itself can't be registered or named yet. I'm not too sure. But yeah, we just slowly walked away, and I kept glancing back a few times, but I quickly stopped and just tried to get home as quickly as possible at this point. I always had wanted to get up and close and personal to a UFO. Life elsewhere is just so fascinating to me. I always wanted to see what they really look like. But after that, I must admit that I'm pretty terrified and will never chase down or even take a picture of a UFO if I ever see one that close again. I've seen a lot in my life, but that hands down was the scariest thing to ever happen to me, and I'd love to know if anyone else has seen something like that before as well. I've heard of the triangles, the bells, the saucers, cigars, and all sorts of stuff, but never what I've seen. If it was a secret military ship of some kind and they wanted to test it in a discreet area, why would they choose to test it right next to the only populated place in the town? Either way, there was definitely something more going on there than just some car hoppers. This happened maybe 2 years ago and is without a doubt the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. So me and my at the time roommate were just finished working out. It was about 8 PM and the sun had already gone down. After walking out of the gym, we decided to do a couple of laps at the nearby stadium before we go home. Nothing obscure happens on the way there, but once the stadium comes into view, we realize the floodlights are turned off. This didn't deter us, as we were pretty certain we could run in the dark either way. But we went to the bottom row of the seats to leave our gym bags there, and as we were placing our bags, we started hearing it. It was whistling, coming from the top rows, right above us. Not only was the very fact that someone was sitting in the dark the entire time unnerving, but the whistling itself was pretty bone-chilling. I don't know if I can explain it properly like this, but it was 3 low-pitch whistles, then a higher pitch, then 1 lower pitch, and then it would repeat. It sounded like whatever was making it wanted us to come to it. We were pretty unnerved, like I said, so we whispered to each other to grab the bags and then jog to the other side of the stadium and just get out. We took our bags and started jogging, and almost immediately afterwards, the whistling just stopped. As I could hear nothing else but our feet stomping on the ground and heavy breathing, I just figured that it had grown bored and just went away. But just then, I started hearing something. I could hear a third set of feet running behind us. My stomach dropped as I realized that whatever that was running towards us. Our adrenaline kicked in and we started booking it to the exit. As we were getting closer to the exit, I could hear it again, whistling, but this time about 10 feet away from me. We made it past the exit and out onto the street, and we didn't quit running until another block down. We stopped to catch our breaths, and whatever was chasing us had quit at the stadium exit. Only me and my roommate know about this story, and we've never really talked about it. But that whistling is the most disturbing thing that I've ever heard. When I was 12, I decided making a newspaper for my entire neighborhood was a really great idea. My friend and I, both avid fiction wannabe authors and generally just cringy middle-aged school nerds, decided to get together once a month and write absolutely enthralling articles about the weather or when the pool would be open, and then deliver our front-back one-page newsletter to every single house in our two-street neighborhood, whether they wanted it or not as well. And we kept this up for about 2 years, until the time of this story. So, we were on our once-a-month paper route, if you could call walking around our small neighborhood and putting a single sheet of paper in every mailbox a paper route. It was raining this particular time, so we had umbrellas and were carefully walking to each mailbox, trying to keep our newsletter as dry as possible. This also meant that all the cars that came by had their headlights and windshield wipers on, and also made sufficient noise with their tires splashing through the puddles. But my point is that we knew when a car was approaching behind us. So we were about halfway through on a street that we weren't so familiar with, the one we didn't live on, when we noticed this souped-up old white car coming really slowly up the street. Now, the way my neighborhood was set up, the only reason why you would be on the same street as us is if you lived there or you made a wrong turn. So there were even less cars on this street, and the ones that passed usually were people that we knew. We continued walking from mailbox to mailbox while periodically checking to make sure the white car wasn't just parked. It was moving too, but so slowly, and the headlights and the windshield wipers were either broken or just not turned on. This car drove slowly past us as we walked, going roughly the same pace as our steps, if not slower. And something was definitely really off about everything. There was no reason for this car to be on this road in the first place. We definitely didn't recognize it or the driver inside, and it was going so incredibly slow. Car trouble? I don't know, but it was weird. We pretended one of the houses was ours, and we walked up the driveway to avoid the car as it got close to us. It continued at the same pace, and we watched it until it eventually disappeared around the corner. We just laughed about it, thinking that it was weird, but nothing happened. It was all well and good again until the car showed up at the end of the street behind us again, going just as slowly as it had before. What was this person doing? We were so confused and walked a little farther from the curb to avoid the car again as it came by. We didn't laugh about it this time though, because we both could sense that there was danger lurking. And the car showed up a third time at the end of the street too. And at this point, we decided that we should cut through some of the yards to just get home. Better safe than sorry, right? So, we crossed the street, but the car passed again, and we just shrugged it off and we just kept going. But the fourth time this car came around, it pulled right up next to us, and the driver had his window down. Being 12 and living in a bubble, my friend and I hadn't quite been exposed to the world of drugs and junkies, but we knew something was up with this guy. He had a white towel draped over half his head, was wearing a white tank top, while we were in long sleeves and rain jackets, had his windows down, and when he spoke, his speech was slurred. We were polite and we said hello, and he asked us what we were doing through his open window. We continued walking as this interaction took place because we knew this dude seemed sketchy, but at the same time we didn't want to assume anything and just be rude. When we told him that we ran a newspaper, he immediately perked up and enthusiastically asked about placing an ad. He also took his hands off the steering wheel and leaned over so that he could get closer to the window. And boy, did he smell of cigarettes. My friend and I looked at each other. We knew that something was wrong at this point. We told him no, we don't place ads in our newspaper, even though we did. We're quite the entrepreneurs at 12, right? And then he told us that we were pretty girls and probably cold, right? Our idea to cut through some yards was decided. We hurriedly said something about needing to go home, and he began shouting at us from inside the car as we crossed the street. We bolted to a neighborhood's backyard when we heard the car begin to move quickly and hid in some bushes until we were sure the car was gone. And after that, we just stopped writing our newsletter. Meeting a creepy person while you're alone in the rain in your own neighborhood was a good deciding factor for just calling it quits. In the end, nothing happened, and I'm really glad for that, but it definitely could have gone very, very different. What happened has bothered my sister for just years, and my family has finally talked her into maybe going into therapy to talk about it because she still feels guilty about it. She wanted me to share it here just to get it out there and just to have it written down somewhere as well. So in 2013, my sister was 11 and she was friends with this girl who I'll call Becky. She wasn't her best friend, but she was really close to her. My sister had known Becky since junior school, and she would always come round to play out with my sister and her other friends, so we saw her all the time as well. I was 13 at the time, and because me and my sister are typical sisters, we used to terrorize each other. I would make fun of her in front of her friends, and she would do the same to me. Me and Becky, though, we got along really well, and she was honestly just so funny, and she was nice and friendly, and I used to joke all of the time that I wish I could swap my sister for her. And this is honestly how close we all were. We had a tight bond. So, there's these fields near our house which we would always play on. It's by the sea, so there's lots of sandhills and long grass. There's also a small hut with sports equipment in it. I mention this because police mentioned it a lot. I think that they thought that it was a potential hiding spot, but I'm not too sure. But anyway, my mum would always send me to go and get my sister when it was time for her to come home. Becky lived the opposite side of the field, so we would go one direction while she would go the other. This was pretty normal. Before you say that we should have walked her home, I know that we should have, but at the time we just never thought anything bad would ever happen. On that night, though, I'd gone to get my sister at 7 p.m, and when I got to the field, she headed back to me looking over the fields. I asked her where Becky was, and she said that she was on her way home. I couldn't see Becky anywhere, but at the time I didn't think anything of it, and my sister was acting normal, so we just went home. But then we got a phone call an hour later from Becky's parents asking us where she was. They knew that she'd been playing with my sister and assumed that she was still with her as she hadn't come home yet. But my parents explained that she wasn't with us and she walked home an hour ago. My parents asked my sister when she last saw her, and she told them that she was walking home. And long story short, there was no sign of her at all. Her parents called around all of her friends, and they also said that she wasn't with them, and they began to flip out, and the police were soon called. The next day, her body was found by a dog walker, and she was still on a field behind one of the sandhills. She had been assaulted and strangled. It makes me sick because she was only 11 and she was the sweetest girl ever. It also really bothers me that she never left that field, which means that she was probably murdered close to the time that we were still there, as she never got too far. But the worst part, they never found out who murdered her. But my sister says that they just sat and talked for the hour that they were in the field. There was no indication that anything bad was going to happen. No bad vibes, no suspicious conversations, nothing. She said that a man walked across the sandhill by himself for about 10 minutes, and he was a potential suspect for the police for a while, but I don't think anything ever came from it. My sister just remembers his clothes, but not his face, as he was quite high up on the hill. But my sister still blames herself, and she wishes every day that she could just go back and walk her home. Just thinking about Becky makes me extremely emotional, and I'm actually tearing up while I'm writing this out. I just hope that Becky is safe in heaven and her murder will be solved one day. This happened while my parents were away when I was around 14. So, a friend of theirs was staying in our house at the time, caring for me while they were gone for what I think was about a 2-week period or so. The person staying with us, my brother and I, was sleeping in a smallish house thing that we have at the back of our place, per her choice, as we'd had rooms available for her to sleep in the house, so she wasn't able to hear anything or do anything about any situation that might happen in the actual house itself if it were to take place at night. Anyway, I was up late at night on a school night, I think around 11 or 12, on my phone after having read a book for a bit in bed. For context, my room is on the second floor of our place too. We have an alarm in our house, and normally I turn it on when I go to bed, but my older brother, about 25 at the time, had messaged me saying that he'd be back soon, since he'd been working, so I decided I'd leave it off just to make things easier for him, and so he could turn it on himself. While I was on my phone, I heard noises from downstairs, what I thought was banging, but I just dismissed it as one of my brother's friends, who my brother had mentioned might be coming around at some point, knocking on one of the doors. I stayed on my phone for a few minutes more and then put it to the side and tried to get some sleep. But then I heard more noise downstairs, and at that point I was wondering if maybe there was someone breaking into the house, but I just thought, nah, that's pretty unlikely. But I decided to sit up and continue to listen out for a bit just in case. Another noise, and this time louder, and I began to hear movement downstairs. I thought it was probably my older brother, who had just been making a bit more noise than usual because he was having a hard time opening the door with his key or something. But then I heard the downstairs hall door open, and someone began to move throughout the hall and then continued to make their way up the stairs. My bedroom was right next to the top of the stairs, so I could hear everything clearly as someone ran up. By then I thought, that's not my brother, and reached for my phone, ready just in case I needed to call the police. And then the door swung open, and a tall man in a black hoodie stood in the doorway, his right side slightly behind the door, and made eye contact with me. I was completely frozen because it definitely was not my brother. In fact, I had no idea who this man was. I think he had noticed that my hand was on my phone and, thinking I'd called the police, sprinted downstairs and out of the house, making a lot of noise as he ran. For a moment I was in shock and had no idea what to do. At first I was calm, but then I called the woman who was staying with us on my phone, and I just broke down crying because I was terrified. She ended up coming into the house and comforting me in my room, sitting with me as she called the police. The police arrived later, and I tried to recall the details of the man, but when he had opened my door I was freaking out internally, so all I could remember was the hoodie colour. I later found out that he had broken in by jimmying open one of the downstairs windows with a crowbar, and as soon as I heard that, I realized that if I hadn't have had my hand on my phone, him thinking that I called the police, who knows, he may have actually beaten me to death. In 7th grade, I went with a few dozen classmates of mine on a tour of the East Coast. One of the most greatly anticipated stops was Gettysburg, a town famous for its role in the American Civil War. Our tour guide took us to several battlefield sites. We had just gotten back in the seats of our icily air-conditioned coach bus when several things happened in just quick succession. I suddenly felt really hot. It was as if someone had turned a switch on the temperature. I asked the girl in the seat next to me if she had noticed the heat, and she told me that she was as cold as ever. I then felt pressure on my ear, and it honestly felt like someone was screaming just inches from me, but I couldn't really hear anything. I just felt that vibration and that pressure against my ear, and then I smelled something familiar and really unpleasant. Death. When I was 10 years old, my father decided that he wanted to come home to die. After years of visiting him in the hospital, and after rounds of chemo, suddenly a large hospital bed took up most of the space in our living room. My sister and I would give him a kiss goodbye before running off to catch the school bus, and I'd wonder what that goodbye would mean an hour from now, and 2 hours even. I'm telling you all this not to depress you, but because it factors into my Gettysburg experience. You see, after my father died, my mother had the carpets in our house shampooed. And that was when I noticed what had been collecting in our house all those weeks. The smell of death. So when I tell you that I smelled an intense wave of death, I need you to understand that this was so much worse than the living room carpet at home. The air was just thick with it. And as quickly as the sensation had come to me, they just left. The screaming, the heat, and the stench were gone, and It may seem odd when I tell you that I still don't believe in ghosts, but perhaps knowing about my living room will help you understand what I mean when I say that I believe that sadness and pain and loss can hang onto walls like residual smoke or something. They stain carpets, they infect the land, and the land at the battle site was screaming under the weight of the dying in the merciless July heat. So I'm a male, and this happened when I was about 19 years old. I'm still not sure what to make of it, but I'm 26 now, and it's really not the initial experience itself that gave me the spooks. It's more about what happened after. So, I was in nursing school at this time. One night I woke up at around 3:30 in the morning. My TV was on as usual because I sleep better with it. I was laying on my back and something just felt really off. I glanced to my right and I saw something next to my bed. I saw a black figure, only from the shoulders up, like it was crouched down next to my bed, just watching me sleep. When I saw this, obviously I became anxious and tried to roll over, but I realized that I just couldn't move my body. I couldn't scream and I couldn't do anything but watch it. The figure seemed to be hovering slowly back and forth along the side of my bed. This felt it went on for a lifetime, but it was only a few minutes because I could see my clock below my TV. And eventually, the figure lowered itself below the edge of my bed until I just couldn't see it anymore. Once I lost sight of it, I immediately started getting a tingling sensation just all over my body and I was able to move again. I was so terrified that I just scooted over towards the other side of my bed and stared at my TV until I fell back to sleep. And this is where it gets interesting. So, a few weeks later, one of my classmates, 35 and female, decided to open up to a few of us, stating that she basically was a medium. I have mixed feelings on this, so I wasn't quick to believe her until she started telling another classmate about her dead grandmother. None of us knew she was deceased, and she never told this woman either. And she also described an object that she often sees with her, and it turned out to be a necklace her grandmother gave her before she died. A few shocking reveals later, I decided to ask her about the thing that I saw next to my bed that night, and before I even got to explain anything, she asked if it was about the little girl. But this was odd because when I was in high school, I was woken up by my cat crying and I saw a little girl standing behind him. Anyway, I proceeded to explain to her about the situation that happened with the black figure next to my bed, and after I was done, she said, "You didn't look over the edge of the bed, did you?" I hadn't told her that, but I responded to her question with no, I didn't. She told me that if I ever saw it again, do not follow it, and you need to say the Lord's Prayer. After this, she told me that she had also seen a little boy with me before, and she said that he was no good, and she called him a little demon boy. At this time in my life, me and my friends were exploring old cemeteries, abandoned houses, general creepy places, and she stated that I could have picked him up doing these kinds of activities. This was on a Friday. The following Monday, I jokingly asked her, "You didn't see the little boy with me today, did you?" And she laughed and said, "No, but you've seen him before, right?" And this gave me chills. Of course, I asked her where I had seen him. And next, this woman looked into me. And I say that because when she looked into my eyes, she just stared into me like no one has ever done before. And after a few awkward seconds of this, she proceeded to tell me where I had seen him. This woman described the layout of my bedroom to me, told me that I saw him next to my closet. She literally described both the entries to my bedroom and the layout of the room, and then she told me that I saw him next to my closet. I hadn't told her this, but the closet was only about 2 feet apart from my bed, and that is the side of the bed that I saw the black figure. After explaining that to her, she told me that he disguised himself in front of me that night, and she said that if something presents itself in black to you, it's usually a demonic presence. And yes, that made me even more scared. After this, I cut back on the late-night graveyard and abandoned house searches. I haven't seen anything like that since, though I have had a few other occurrences happen. I've been having these kind of encounters since I was a child, though most were mild and I didn't feel afraid. But the figure next to my bed, was the only moment that I truly feared for myself in regards to the paranormal. If I remember correctly, the year was 2011. My dad and sister and I lived in the same house as we do today, which is a 3-story house that we took over after my grandmother passed. Me and my sister both had our bedrooms on the highest floor, right by the attic, and the attic was where most of the activity came from at the time. Cliché, I know. We always heard weird noises coming from in there, and even my most skeptical friends told me that they felt just a very unpleasant feeling every time they walked up the stairs to the 3rd floor. And the unpleasant feeling got even stronger if you went to the attic. Now one day, I went into the attic to search for some old stuff that we had stored in there. As I'm looking around in the boxes and bags, I saw someone in the corner of my eye. My sister was slowly approaching me from behind, crouching, and I was sure that she was trying to scare me or something. So I just started talking to her, and she stopped, right behind me. I don't remember what I said to her, but I just didn't get a reply. So I said her name, and still no reply, and I said her name louder, and yes, I heard her respond. Although not from behind me, but from her bedroom. I was about to have a panic attack, and I still saw the figure in the corner of my eye crouching. I saw long, blonde, dirty hair, but couldn't make out a face quite, and I closed my eyes in fear before opening them again, and as I turned around, there was nobody there. I grabbed the bag that I was supposed to look through, and I just ran like hell straight out of that attic. My eyes feel hot and my throat is dry, and I was in my room not even 10 minutes ago just watching some things on YouTube. I hear something move really quickly. I look over to my bookshelf, and the cup that I had there moved unrealistically fast, about 2 inches backwards. I was, at the time, very confused, as I just thought that it slid or something. But now this part, I will understand if no one believes me, as I doubt it even more, trust me. So I got up to use the restroom, and I heard 2 soft knocks and then 1 hard knock on my windows. But note too that the drapes were closed, so I couldn't actually see. I mustered up enough courage, though, and opened the drapes. And there, standing there, was a boy with ginger hair and pitch black eyes, and he quickly dropped away from my window as soon as I saw him. It was as if he fell off a ledge or something and just slid down, out of sight. I really don't understand it, though, and I'm not sure how to describe it perfectly, but his eyes were a type of dark that a blind man sees, if that makes any sense. It's the best that I can describe it. But just as this kid disappeared, my ears started ringing really harshly, as if a grenade just went off by me. I ran into the living room where I'm now sharing this with you guys, and honestly, I've never believed in the paranormal, but now I kind of feel like I have to. I'm still cooling down right now, and I'm sweating. I have a dry-ass throat and my eyes feel hot and heavy, but I'm going to try and get some sleep now and see what happens. In 2002, my husband was deployed out of the country for 15 straight months, and I kept our housing unit occupied on a military post in the Eastern Time Zone, halfway between Canada and Mexico, with our 2 children, 2 cats, and my 90-pound bulldog Mastiff mix. I worked at a large and privately owned wildlife rehab a day or 2 a week. This charity participated in a bingo charity nearby to raise funds, and it competed with another charity run by 2 people who claimed to be in witness protection for witnessing a murder up north. But they were sketchy people, to say the least. I met 2 people who were terrified after dealing with them, and they claimed ignorance as to why large dogs and cats disappeared in their care. During the 15-month separation, though, I decided that our oldest was ready to assume the responsibility of caring for the housing unit with the help of our neighbour, while I left for a short period of time. He learned how to answer the phone, to lock the doors, how to call our bulldog to the main door should anyone cause any problems, and how to call our neighbour if anything should go amiss or awry, or if anyone got hurt or whatnot. And so too did our youngest. With this being so, I asked our neighbour to be on call one night as I drove up to a super Walmart to get some groceries. She agreed, and I left in our two-door Tracker soft top. The Walmart that I went to was 15 miles away in a slightly larger city than the one nearest. Its main parking lot was really long, as the sides had no spots, and to its left was a Lowe's. So I parked about 15 spaces away from the store's front. I was much closer to the side road leading to the Lowe's than to the store itself. When I parked, there were a few cars by mine, and it was about dusk. When I came out about 25 minutes later, it was fully dark around this time, about 9:15 p.m, and my car was one of the only cars at the end of the parking lot. There was one car by mine though, and it was a van. It was one of those windowless utility vans, like from the 70s, or at least the design has never been updated. It was a dull white, and the weird thing about the van was that it was parked ahead of my car, lest I would never have seen my car at all. You see, two-door Trackers are short. Even in a regularly parked manner, they're not visible from the bottom of a parking aisle, as most all other cars are longer than it. The van was the only car parked by mine at all, and it was parked almost in between the space next to mine and the space in front of itself. As I approached the back of my Tracker, I was going to put the groceries in the back. I saw that the van was parked in such a way so that its sliding side door on the right side was adjacent to my driver's side door. It was also parked rather closely, so that if I opened my driver's side door and someone slid open the van's side door, there's no way that I could run forward in between the two. And this definitely gave me the willies. I remember very well putting plastic bags of Walmart crap into the back of the car and wondering just why someone would park like that. I mean, why? Here's the thing about stuff like this too. When a female or a young person or whatever sees something this freaky in real life, she might not get it at first. Unless she grew up in like Detroit or the west side of Cleveland, danger signs blink a little slower. And worse, we're told by our family that we're just imagining things when we report that we were scared about something. I had given birth to a child in a foreign country, ran cross-country in a place where boar hogs roamed, and taken care of many situations with crazy neighbours without a man before, hence the big dog. But I still stood there at the back of the Tracker, trying to figure out why I was so unsettled. I think that we just don't think that the worst can happen, which is why when, or if it does, we might just freeze. It never occurs to us that we might really be in trouble. All this being so, I decide to listen to the idiot voice in my head, and I close the back of the Tracker, and I walk over to the passenger side of the car. I unlocked it, tossed my purse into the back, and crawled over the stick shift as fast as I could, closing the door quickly behind me and hitting the lock. I then shoved the key into the ignition while slamming down the emergency brake, put the car into first and gave it gas. I pulled away from the van, turned right, and sped away to the Lowe's portion of the parking lot, all without putting on my seatbelt or turning on the lights. But by the time I pulled another right around to face the same direction, the van was still there. I put on my seatbelt, and as I began to adjust myself, the van left. I drove home carefully, and when I got home, the kids were fine, and our dog was happy, and the neighbour said nothing amiss happened. And this might be the end of the story, you're thinking, but it definitely isn't. A few weeks later, I had to go to Walmart again, and the neighbour said that she also needed a thing or two, so I told her that we could barter. I bought her 2 things, and she kept an eye on my children. Again, I parked near the end of the parking lot. This time, however, I took our other car, a 4-door, hardtop, 5-speed Tracker. We like the cars, sue me. I shopped quickly, and upon leaving the store and walking toward our car with the cart, I stopped dead in my tracks about 10 parking spaces out because a windowless, white utility van was parked near our car, but parked slightly forward again. I must have stood there for about 20 seconds trying to gather what was happening. I take this time to redress the concept of reality. I mean, what the hell is really happening? I can only remember certain things about that moment, and I know I turned my cart around. I know that I felt numb. I know that I felt like I was floating, not walking, and that I was floating too slowly to get back to the store for my liking. I remember that my teeth thudded in my head with every footstep, even though I was floating. And when I did get to the building, I walked up to the tallest person in a blue vest and cheerfully asked if he could walk me to my car. And I did not say, "Someone is trying to abduct me." In fact, I seem to remember thinking that that would discredit me. It all happened very quickly, so instead I asked nicely if I could have an escort to my car. He nudged his chin up in another person's direction and walked with me towards the doors. When we got outside, though, the white van was miraculously just gone. I figured it would be, but I must admit that it made me wonder if I imagined it. Anywho, I told him that I would really just appreciate if he watched me load the groceries and drive away. He was very nice, and he did just that. As I drove home, I watched for trailing cars, and there were none. Anyway, by then, 911 had occurred, sadly, and it was hard to get on the post without an ID. I called the police that night and told them about both incidences, and I didn't file a report, but I left my phone number and said that I would come in if anyone else experienced a white van issue. As I thought, I was not taken seriously. I take responsibility for not calling the police the first time, and after that I stopped working for the charity a while later. Up until my mid-20s, I would have told you that there's no such thing as ghosts. Most things people say, I think it's just their imagination or wishful thinking. But nowadays, I don't know. I don't know. So when I was in my 20s and newly married, my spouse and I moved for his job. We needed to find a place to live in pretty quickly, and fate would have it that we lucked into the perfect house. It was old, and in its previous life it had been someone's beach cottage, which I actually loved. What's better than living in a resort town, close enough to walk to the beach, right? Plus, it wasn't in a resort area, it was on the back half of someone's property, with one road in and out, and lots of trees and shade, very quiet, no other people around. It was basically just one big room with a small addition to one side that contained a kitchen and a bath, and another addition off the back that had a bedroom. And the big room was awesome. All windows on 3 sides with a nice breeze most of the time, a fireplace and lots of open area. And the only thing that really pinged my radar was the landlord. When we rented, he was just overly insistent that we sign a year lease and we couldn't break it for any reason. No matter what, we needed to pay out the lease whether we lived in the house or not. I thought that was a little weird, the way he kept repeating that over and over because he wanted to make absolutely sure that we understood. But it just didn't really register at the time, other than I was a bit worried that maybe there were troublemakers or noisy parties on the beach or something. He assured us, though, that it was a very quiet neighborhood, but he repeated again that we couldn't break the lease. I worked a 9-to-5 job at the time. My spouse worked 12-hour on and off shifts, so there were lots of times when I would be home by myself. The first month or 2 were fine. I liked the house and I liked the neighborhood. I really liked the beach. I'm honestly a homebody, so when the spouse was at work, I would stay at home reading or watching a little TV or cooking and whatnot. I'd always wanted to learn how to knit anyway, so I bought some yarn and started teaching myself. But then, sometime around the 3rd month, I just started getting a really strong feeling like someone would be standing behind me while I was reading. You know, like looking over your shoulder type thing. It only happened when I was alone in the house and only when I was in the main room. Without thinking too much about it though, I started sitting in places where my back was to the wall or reading in the bedroom. When I went to bed at night, I started closing the door between the bedroom and the rest of the house because I felt safe in the bedroom. Sometimes though, when I fell asleep in front of the TV late at night, I'd wake up to catch someone standing in front of the fireplace just out of the corner of my eye. I thought that I needed to stop dreaming so much, but I started to stay in the bedroom after dark with the door shut after this. And things started not being where I put them in the big room. I got kind of irritated with my spouse for messing with my stuff. I wasted 5 to 10 minutes almost every day looking for my handbag or my car keys. And then, one day when I came home after work, I found my knitting yarn wrapped and tangled around all the furniture in the big room. And I don't mean just a little bit. I mean the yarn was strung between couches and wrapped around the legs of the chairs. I told myself that my spouse was playing a trick on me and I just cleaned it up. Then I decided that I wouldn't mention it to him just to see how long it took for him to come clean. He never did, by the way, and I just moved my knitting to the bedroom. My sister came to visit for a long weekend at one point. I gushed so much about our lovely beach house that she came to visit and see the beach. She came for a 4-day weekend. She slept on the pull-out sofa in the big room, and after the first night, she told us that the sofa wasn't very comfortable and she thought that she was coming down with something, so she changed her travel arrangements and she was leaving that afternoon. She seemed agitated too, but she just wouldn't talk about it. A few days after she went home, she called me. She started the conversation with, "I know you don't believe in ghosts and maybe I'm just being stupid." And honestly, my heart just dropped. I thought I was the only one, and I was just being so stoic and pretending that I never saw or heard anything. She went on to tell me that after she went to sleep that night in the big room, noises woke her up in the middle of the night. She thought it was one of us, but no one was there. Then, while she was sitting in the bed looking around, the windows just started opening and closing by themselves. It just kind of went around the room, and one window opened and closed, and then the next one to that, and then the next one, and the next one, and she heard footsteps walking straight towards her, but nobody was there. The footsteps walked right up to the bed where she was sitting, then over the bed, continued across the room, and then through the side door into the kitchen area. She said that she ran out of the front door and spent the rest of the night on the front porch. She came back inside when the sun came up, waited for us to wake up, and made excuses to go home. And obviously, she didn't want to spend another night in that house. She then said to me, "Look, I know you don't want to believe me, and you know what, that's okay, but I'm never sleeping in that house again." I told myself that my sister had always been a little nutty about stuff like that, so knowing that the house was old, she probably just had a very vivid dream. I kept telling myself that, but a few weeks after, just when I'd stopped jumping at every stray noise, I woke up one Sunday morning and went to cook a leisurely breakfast for me and my spouse. And I still don't know how to explain this, but I opened the kitchen cabinets to get the dishes out to start cooking, and all the dishes were rearranged. And not messy, mind you, not tumbled out. They were just all really neat and orderly, but everything was on the wrong shelf. The shelf that normally had glasses now had plates stacked on them, and the shelves that normally had bowls now had glasses on them. My first thought, honestly, was that somebody had been in the house during the night. I checked all the locks, still locked. We didn't know many people, and I couldn't think of anyone who would pull a trick like that. And besides, there was so much stuff moved that no one could do it quietly without disturbing people sleeping in directly the next room. And so I did what any half-crazed, scared-to-crap person would do. I pretended like it just never happened. I pretended that I always kept the glasses on that shelf and there was nothing strange about having all the plates on this shelf. I sure as hell wasn't moving anything back because I didn't want to see what would happen if I did. I cooked breakfast though, and I went on with my day, and later that afternoon, I told my spouse that I wasn't really comfortable in this house anymore, and could we find somewhere else to live? Amazingly enough, my spouse never asked me why. He simply said that that was probably a good idea and let's find something quick. And we moved out. We called the landlord after we'd already packed and moved the furniture. He came over and picked up the keys, and he never, not once, asked why we were moving. In fact, he never met our eyes and just kept looking at the ground. We agreed to keep paying the rent until he could find some new tenants. Months later, I actually asked my spouse if he ever felt anything strange in that house, and he said, "Yeah, actually, that wasn't a good house, and I'm glad we moved." And we never talked about it again. So this happened a long time ago when I was just a kid. I was home alone one hot summer evening. My parents were out on business and I was enjoying the time alone to do whatever I wanted. We lived in a 2-bedroom first-floor apartment at the time. From the front entrance was a hall that opened into the kitchen. To the left at the far end of the kitchen was my room, and to the right of the kitchen was the living room, which connected to a small den. My parents' bedroom was also connected to the living room off to the right. It was around 9 p.m. when I'd finished dinner and began my nightly routine of taking out the trash, brushing my teeth, and just shutting down for the night. Before retreating into my room, I opened all the windows in the kitchen and living room so that the house would cool down over the night. The windows were all barred, so I wasn't too worried about any funny business happening. I'm a little bit of a security freak, so all the doors in the house have locks, including my bedroom and the bathroom. I eventually shut off all the lights and I went to my room to watch some TV. I would say that at around midnight, I think I dozed off. I had a really weird dream too, or rather a nightmare, of someone knocking on my door with the knocking getting progressively louder. And it was odd because in the dream, I was laying in my bed, but I just couldn't move. The knocking got so blaringly loud until I just couldn't stand it, and then I heard a scream and I woke up. My heart was racing and I was sweating a little, but there was no damage done. I looked around my room and glanced at my alarm, which read 4 a.m. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I brushed the dream off and I laid back down. I closed my eyes and then suddenly heard knocking on my actual bedroom door. A little delirious, I thought that I'd slipped back into my nightmare, but my eyes shot wide open and I sat up and stared at my door trying to listen. And then there were 3 slow knocks that followed. My first thought was that my parents were back early with food or something and they wanted me to have some. My dad was notorious for knocking on my door when he got home late at night to check on me, sometimes without calling my name first as well. I always told him that it spooked me and he should announce himself when he knocks, but he always forgets. So I got up and began walking towards the door, but something just felt wrong. When my parents come home, there's usually commotion. They might be having a conversation, or I can hear their keys jingling, my mum's heels, footsteps, or something. This time, though, it was just dead silent. I stopped halfway to the door and I called out, "Who is it?" There was no answer. I opened my mouth to call out again, but before I could get the first word out, there were several rapid knocks on the door. Very persistent knocks, as if it was an emergency and whoever was on the other side needed to get in now. I felt a lump in my throat and my mind was racing, and the first thing I thought of was that it must have been my dad on the other side and he's in trouble. What if he's choking and can't speak? What if he needs my help? I was frozen in place and couldn't move, and I said, "Who is it?" once more. And again, nothing. "Please say something. Please tell me who it is. It's not funny," I said. A few moments of silence went by, when suddenly it was as if someone threw their whole weight into the door. Rapid, loud bangs began attacking the door, kicks and punches. It was as if there were 3 people on the other side trying to bang the door down. It was so loud that I just started crying, and I found myself jumping backwards and crawling to the corner of my room. The violent banging went on for a few more moments, and then just silence. I sat in the corner frozen. My hands were covering my mouth and tears were rolling down my cheeks. I thought that this was the end. I was shocked the door still stood because when I heard the first bang, I thought the frame would come crashing down and whatever was on the other side would instantly enter and just end me. I sat there for a period of time that felt like an eternity, and suddenly I heard a clinking, the sound of metal brushing into each other. I knew whatever was on the other side was going through the silverware drawer, and if my life didn't end already, this was my last chance because I wouldn't get another one. So I sprang up and climbed onto my dresser sitting against my window. I threw open the curtain and shoved the window down, climbed out as quietly as I could. I fell to the sidewalk and ran to the police station down the road. I was hysterical and I told them what had occurred. That night, my parents were called and they did an investigation of the house. The only things out of place were a cigarette butt left at the base of my bedroom door and a butter knife on the kitchen table. In the following months, we moved out of that apartment, and thankfully, I can say that was the most excitement that I'd ever been through. I soon went to college and graduated, moved to a new state with my family nearby, and life is thankfully continuing as normal. I'm an insomniac, and 2 weeks ago, I felt like I wasn't going to be able to sleep, so I decided to go and take a walk to relax a bit. It was around 12:30. Considering that I'm 6'2" and a 250-pound man in decent shape, I never felt scared to walk at night, thinking that people would be more scared to see me than the opposite. But around 10 minutes into my walk, I just got a chill in my spine. Something just wasn't right, and I glanced around me and noticed someone on the other side of the street wearing a hoodie and walking. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it's just another insomniac maybe, but the chill just wouldn't go away. Something was definitely off about this guy. I started walking faster at this point and decided that I would cut my walk short and just go back home, but the guy kept the pace and he even started to walk faster than me. At that point, I was sweating like crazy, but I went faster. 2 minutes had passed and I turned my head again to get a better look at the guy. That's when I noticed that somebody else was catching up on my side of the road, also wearing a hoodie. My brain went into panic mode and I started running as fast as I could. Soon after, I heard their footsteps catching up, and at that point, I was near my house, so I knew the layout by heart. I jumped over a bike rack and went down into the dirt trail that went into a small forest near my house. I know, looking back, the forest was definitely not the safest choice. I knew that they were still following me, but were not right on my tail since there was a delay before they hit the dirt path. My lungs were just on fire, but I didn't care. I diverged from the main path and I went into the forest, running through the trees in a smaller path that led to one of the neighbors' backyards. I ran up on the other side of my street to my house and turned the corner and went through the bushes around my house and entered using my back door. With my whole body on fire by that point, I peeked through my window and saw them just run past my house. I was safe, but I saw something that made my body turn from burning to freezing in a split second. Both of them had knives in their hands, and I mean big knives. I don't know if it was because of the running or because of the fear, probably both, but eventually I threw up. I was lucky that night, I know. About 4 years ago, I worked as a laundress. I worked 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. and would often work alone. We usually have a security guard posted near the parking lot. They carry a radio and pepper spray, and later in the day they patrol the building. A new guy had started though, and I never saw him watching over the parking lot when I came in each morning. Throughout my shift, he would come into my laundry room. He was talkative, but I noticed that he would look at my body a lot when he thought I wouldn't notice. One day, I came into work and started putting my stuff away, getting ready to begin. I hadn't turned on all the lights yet, so there were parts of the room I couldn't see, when suddenly I hear radio static in the corner of the room and I see a red radio light. I turn on the lights and the new guy is in the corner of the room, just hiding and watching me. When I asked what he was doing there, he said that he was just hanging out and started laughing. It was obvious that he was waiting for me. He ended up doing this so often too that I ended up just getting used to it. But I came in early one day and was working in one of our smaller areas. He came into the smaller room to talk to me. He's a big guy, so I couldn't get around him. He was just talking to me, but I couldn't move or leave the room because he blocked the door. He asked me why I came in early that day, and I told him it was because I had to leave early later, and he told me that I was required to tell him all my hours so that he always knew where I was. He was leaning over me. He was very tall, and I honestly felt like he was about to try and upset me. I had this horrible feeling in my stomach too, that he was about to try something, so I pushed past him and called my supervisor, who said that he would keep an eye on him. I told him that I just had a bad gut feeling about this guy and that I needed to leave for the day. And the next day, he was fired. And apparently, he wasn't in the guard tower at the start of his shift because he would spend the mornings in the woods near the parking area recording girls walking in there for their shifts each morning. They also found a huge collection of pop soda cans, coffee cups in his locker that he admitted he dug out from the various trash bins around where I and the other girls worked. And his wife shortly left him after that and took full custody of their newborn baby. For those unfamiliar with Grindr, it's a gay dating app that shows guys nearby. It makes you use your location while using the app, but it doesn't give you your exact location unless you send it to the person directly. Anyways, I got a message from a blank profile one day. No name, no pic, and no bio. The only thing that popped up was how close he was, less than a mile. This happens a lot because, well, there's lots of closeted guys out there, especially back then. Being an overweight guy in the gay community, I had to take anything that I could get because most gay guys in my community wouldn't even give me the time of day. He started off nice though, introduced himself as Jesus and asked how I was doing and all that sort of small talk. And yes, Jesus is a bit of a common name in some cultures. He told me that he was into chubbier guys though, and after exchanging pics, we both agreed that we found the other one attractive. He asked me if I would like to come over to play video games and maybe have some fun. I'd only met a couple of guys off of Grindr at this point, and although we had some good times, it ultimately just didn't pan out. However, I'd always met them somewhere public first, so I'd never met anyone at their place or anyone come over to mine. I figured, though, that it had been long enough and some casual fun might be nice. Plus, he was really cute and actually my type. He agrees to come and pick me up since I'm only a few blocks away. Apparently he lived in the nearby trailer park. I decided that I'd like to shower first, and he says he'll head over. And then he says that he's really embarrassed to ask, but wonders if I'd be willing to lend him $20. Supposedly he lived with his mum and she had left for the weekend without any food or money for him or something. I know that it was really stupid in hindsight, but I honestly felt really bad for him. I tell him that I actually don't have any cash, but he says that that's okay. I can just send him some money through an app. I don't remember what it was called, but it was something like Venmo. I go ahead and send it though and take my shower and then let him know that I'm ready. He says that he's heading out, but he can't find his keys. I say it's okay and I'll just wait outside for him. I hadn't given him my address yet, but I was almost ready to. However, when I asked if he had found them, he just never responded. Minutes went by and then an hour, and I messaged him again to ask if he was still coming, and I could see him going on and offline, so I know that he read my messages. I finally just accepted that he was ghosting me and probably just wanted money. So I messaged him one last time and just told him that that was pretty messed up, as well as explained that had he just asked, I would have given him money without having to go through all of that. But what can I say? I can be a softie sometimes. Fast forward a couple of weeks and I never heard back from him, so I just blocked him. I get another message from someone on Grindr relatively close to me, and his profile is also blank, which definitely raises my suspicions. He tells me that he's also into chubby guys, which really makes me suspicious because it's highly unlikely two chubby chasers live so close to me. We trade pics again and it's a different guy, but he suddenly asks for money again. In Grindr, you can create as many accounts as you'd like. All you need is an email address. But there were tons of spam accounts on there that are automated. It was a real pain. But anyway, I called him out because I was like 95% sure that it was Jesus. At first he acts like he doesn't know what I'm talking about, calls me crazy and then blocks me. I felt a little bit bad because I thought maybe I'd made a mistake and just chased off a guy for nothing. But then again, his sudden offensive reaction definitely made me have my doubts. Weeks go by though, and every so often this same guy tries to fool me, even though I don't fall for it. Eventually, I blow up on him and ask him what the hell his problem is. We start going at it, and eventually he says, "You wouldn't say this stuff to my face." I tell him that I would gladly tell him to get lost in person, not that I expected him to actually show up this time, and he responded with, "Alright, we'll see about that. Be there soon." Now, I was a little worried at this point because it crossed my mind that he may not actually be gay and might be some sort of homophobe looking to bash some gay guys. My mind, for some reason, always goes back to those men who have been murdered after meeting up with someone on Grindr. However, I realized that I never gave him my address, so I should be fine. So I say, "Nice try, but I never gave you my address." He says, "Yes, you did, stupid. You just didn't know it was me. Be ready, I'm on my way." At this point, my anxiety starts setting off because I did give my address to a guy who had to cancel last minute, but I didn't think anything of it because it was way before Jesus had messaged me a second time. I try to think about what to do, so I try to decide and document his threats. I say, I know that I didn't give you my address, and besides, what do you want to do with me anyway? And he says, you'll see, I've got something for you. Now, the trailer park is always having police go by there, and my neighborhood is separated from theirs by a bayou. At night, I always heard gunshots out there, so I began to panic a bit. I mean, what if he had a gun, or what if he brought friends with him? I say, oh yeah, then what's that? He says, something that'll shut you up. I'm outside. I started freaking out because I honestly couldn't tell if he was just trying to mess with me or if he really was outside. I'd been screenshotting everything and sent it to the Grindr admins to report him for credible threats of violence. I wasn't sure if I could call the cops or not because if he was lying, I didn't want to look stupid. Plus, I wasn't sure if it was even enough for them to do anything anyway. I decided to peek outside from the upstairs window and see if I could spot him. If I could get the make and model of his car, then maybe I could at least have something to give the cops, if need be. I live in the middle of a cul-de-sac, so when I look out the window, I can see all the way to the end of the street, and when I looked out, I saw a car that I'd never seen before parked on the side of the road at the end. My heart was pounding because somehow I just knew that it was him, but a part of me was hoping that it wasn't. I decided that I'd test him and see if he really was out there, and I said, well, I'm waiting. And he said, I'm outside already. Where are you? Of course, I wasn't, but if that was him and he did know my address, then why wouldn't he just park outside of my house? And sure enough, I was right. He says, yeah, I see you. You're going to get it now. And then I say, then give it to me. I'm right here. And he says, just you wait. I knew that he couldn't see me from his car because I was peeking out discreetly and our windows have a privacy shade on them where people only see a black screen from the outside. A few more minutes go by and eventually the car just takes off. I have a feeling that he used Grindr to triangulate the area of where my neighborhood was, but of course he just couldn't find my exact house because it hadn't been him who I'd given my address to. Grindr later sent me a message saying that he'd been banned from the app and they contacted the local authorities. I never heard anything else after that, so I don't really know what became of it. The cops never contacted me too if they did pay him a visit, and I just never heard from him again. These days I'm actually married, so I don't use Grindr anymore, thankfully. But still, it took a while before I was able to sleep soundly after that. I rarely left the house too, and when I did, I always made sure that his car just wasn't around anywhere. In hindsight, he was probably just a stupid kid that just wanted to troll people. But then again, maybe not. These stories were told to me by my stepmom, and she's okay with me retelling them to you guys. All of these stories take place over 20 years ago, and she hasn't had anything like what she shared with me since. Other than the haunting that I personally experienced, that is, but that's a different story altogether. So, back when my stepmom was a little girl, around 8 years old, she lived in Mexico with her parents and 5 other siblings. My stepmom is the eldest, and because of that, she shared a room with the babies of her family. But one night she explained how she was woken just kind of randomly and saw these 2 little kids holding hands and standing right next to her bed. She said that they were see-through and that they just stared at her, unmoving. She was terrified, but didn't make a noise as to not wake her siblings, and instead just remained frozen in place. After a while, she blinked and they just vanished as if they weren't there at all. She went back to sleep, brushing it off as just some sort of a dream or something, and in the morning she didn't say a word to her parents. Over the course of a few weeks, she started seeing glimpses of the 2 kids throughout her house, but it was always out of the corner of her eye. On one morning, she was in the kitchen helping her siblings get some breakfast when she looked up and she saw the kids right by her youngest baby brother. She immediately grabbed what was closest to her, a wooden spoon, and launched herself at the kids, shouting at them to leave her brother alone. They disappeared, and her siblings were all confused as none of them had seen it. She told them that it was alright though, and they just continued on with her day. Eventually, she said that she started to see them almost every night. She'd awake from dreams that she couldn't remember and would see them just staring down at her, their faces void of any emotion, but always holding hands for some reason. She tried telling them to go away and leave her family alone, and they'd disappear, only to come back at night. Eventually one day she saw them actually move and reach a hand out towards her mother. She screamed at them to not touch her mum, and they snapped their heads to look at my stepmom. She stood her ground and told them to leave her alone, and they vanished again. Her mother quickly started asking her what the problem was, and she explained what she had been seeing. Her mother instantly freaked out and told her father what had happened. As soon as he heard, they took my stepmom out of the house and to her aunt's place. He didn't say anything, but that they'd bring her siblings with them and that they'd be staying with her aunt for a bit. My stepmom later learned that when her mother was pregnant with her, that she had seen the same kids and they had tried to touch her stomach, where my stepmom was still unborn. After her mother gave birth to my stepmom, she stopped seeing them, so when my stepmom told her mother how she had been seeing those kids, she really freaked out. In fact, they ended up calling for a priest and eventually just moved out of that house. A couple of years later, they moved to the United States and everything was fine. My stepmom explained how she remembered occasionally seeing people wandering around looking lost, but that she could see through them. She ignored it, and after a few years, she just stopped seeing them. Fast forward quite a few years to when my stepmom was single and had 3 kids, all very young, babies and toddlers, as she lived 2 houses down from her parents' house where some of her brothers were currently staying. During the time that she was living there, she always felt like someone was watching her, and she just felt this really angry atmosphere around her, is what she said to me. She explained it like trying to relax, but kind of getting stuck and being tense. And she didn't live in that house long, and here's why. On the last night that she slept there, she woke up to something or someone pushing down on her chest. She kept trying to get up or throw her arms at whatever was pushing her down, but her hands just kept hitting air. She struggled for a few minutes, just feeling this weight on her, continuously pushing until she suddenly was able to throw herself upright. She immediately got out of bed and grabbed her kids and ran down to her parents' house. She frantically knocked on the door until her brothers opened it up and let her in. They were worried and asked what was wrong. They had never seen my stepmom so scared before. She's the kind of person who will not hesitate to fight someone to protect people and doesn't take crap from anybody. She also raised her siblings, so they've always seen her as a very strong person. She explained what happened and told them that she refused to go back in that house. Her brothers led her to sit down and she made sure that her kids were alright, and that's when one of her brothers noticed that she had this huge bruise on her chest. She went to the bathroom to look in the mirror and, sure enough, there was this really large bruise that looked like misshapen hands almost. And needless to say, she spent the night there with her kids, and in the morning, she explained to her parents what had happened. She still refused to go back to that house, and her brothers ended up moving everything out of the house for her. She moved somewhere else, and to this day, she still hasn't set foot anywhere near that house, and refuses to get even close to it. She has no idea who the owners, and if any of them had any sort of experience like she did there. She just blatantly refuses to have anything to do with that house. She told the story to my dad once, and he tried to say it was sleep paralysis, but she vividly remembers being able to move around, just unable to get up, and she had multiple witnesses to the bruises that she got from it as well. She won't talk much about it, but swears that something evil is definitely living in that house. I currently work in a hospital where I take blood from patients. I always thought that I'd experience more paranormal activity than I do, but I just put it down to the fact that, well, I'm in the lab and I don't really go anywhere near the morgue, etc. So lately, I've been working the most in a hospital or seniors home deal. There are two wings that project from the cottage hospital, one for seniors who are in their right minds but simply can't take care of themselves, and one for people with dementia and Alzheimer's and all that. Now, the way the blood collection lab is set up, when you're in the lab itself, you walk through a doorway to go into the blood collection area, and directly to your left is the doorway to the small waiting area. Now, on this one day, the lab tech, or the co-worker, is at an x-ray and I'm on my own, and as I walk from the lab to the blood collection area, I see, out of the corner of my eye, an elderly man just sitting in a chair. I notice that there are no labels that have been printed, so I turn to ask him if he's waiting for blood work or for an x-ray or something, and when I do, there's just nobody there. I laugh it off, assuming that it's just my imagination. I will always take the more common, normal answer over anything else, and I just get on with my day. Except, 2 more times, all about 5 minutes apart as well, the same thing happens. In one sighting, he's still sitting, in another, he's standing looking at the door, and each time it's just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, until I look directly at him and there's nothing there. I'm still assuming that there's nothing odd about this. My mind just must be playing tricks on me. Until my co-worker comes back from the x-ray and she's passing the door, stops and spins around and then starts laughing. Hey, I was completely sure that I just saw some old guy standing in the doorway. I told her that I'd seen the same thing 3 times, and we were both kind of creeped out at this point. To be honest, I was a little more upset that maybe he was trying to communicate and we couldn't hear him or see him except for those quick flashes. Later that day, we also learned that one of our casual customers from the home had actually died that night in his sleep. When I was 15, I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma with my sister and my mum to live with an uncle that I'd never met before. As horrible as he was too, he is not the main focus in the story. So my uncle would pick up random